Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The November wind gently touched the windows of a small house near Ottery St. Catchpole, as if trying to whisper something important. Luna Lovegood sat at a table covered with parchments, glass bottles filled with shimmering liquids, and watercolor drawings of magical creatures. She was 20 years old, and in the past 2 years since leaving Hogwarts, she had devoted herself to studying creatures that most wizards considered either too dangerous or entirely imaginary. Today she was working on an article about the emotional patterns of auguries, those small prophetic birds whose cries foretold death. Luna had discovered that they didn't actually predict death, but sensed deep emotional shifts in the magical field around them. This was an important discovery that could change attitudes toward these creatures. Her quill glided across the parchment in elegant movements, leaving behind neat rows of words, between which she made sketches. Here an augury with outstretched wings, here a pattern of its magical aura. The room where she worked was typical for Luna. On the walls hung her own paintings, fantastic creatures she had researched or dreamed of researching. On the ceiling, as in her bedroom at her father's house, she had painted portraits of friends. Harry with his lightning bolt scar, Hermione with a mass of curly hair and a book in hand, Ron with his awkward smile, Ginny with fire in her eyes, Neville with a mimbulous Mimbletonia. They looked down at her from there, as if guarding her work. On the shelves stood strange things, bottles of dirigible plums, dried Gerderoots, a necklace of butterbeer corks that she had never stopped wearing. Between books peeked old issues of the Quibbler, her father's magazine, which many considered mad, but which Luna loved for its frankness and willingness to speak about things others were silent about. Suddenly an owl flew to the window, a large gray bird with gleaming yellow eyes and broad wings. Luna recognized it immediately. It was Arrow, her father Xenophilius's owl. She opened the window, and cold November air rushed into the room along with the owl, bringing the scent of rain and fallen leaves. The bird settled on the edge of the table, carefully avoiding the bottles, and extended its leg with a letter tied to it. Luna noticed the letter was sealed not with ordinary wax, but with something like a frozen icy tear that shimmered with blue light. "Thank you, Arrow," Luna whispered, giving the owl a piece of ginger biscuit the bird always loved. The owl hooted contentedly, pecked at the biscuit, and settled on the table's edge as if waiting for a reply. Luna unrolled the parchment and saw her father's familiar hasty handwriting. But something about it was different. The letters trembled, as if written in haste or agitation. In some places the ink had smudged, as if drops of water had fallen on the paper. Or tears. "My dear Luna, I write to you from Sweden, from the town of Silvermora at the foot of the Scandinavian mountains. I came here following rumors of a colony of crumplehorned snorkaks supposedly seen near the local lake. You know how long I've dreamed of finding proof of their existence. But, Luna, I've stumbled upon something much stranger and more alarming. Something that compels me to write to you in the middle of the night, with a trembling hand, by the light of a single candle. The ancient forest, which locals call Eldskagen, the fire forest, is vanishing. Not being cut down, not burning, not withering. Simply vanishing, Luna. Trees just dissolve into the air, as if they had never existed. As if someone is erasing them from reality with an eraser, like a failed drawing. Along with the trees, magical creatures that have lived there for centuries are disappearing. Locals say they hear the cries of forest guardians at night, those semi-transparent beings made of bark and moss you read about in my old notes. They're vanishing along with their home, and no one can help them. I saw this with my own eyes 3 days ago. I stood at the forest's edge in the morning, when the sun had just risen above the mountains. An enormous spruce, at least 500 years old, suddenly began to glow with a faint blue radiance. At first I thought it was just morning light playing on the frost. But then the tree became transparent. I could see through its trunk, through its branches, and within a few minutes it simply vanished. The ground beneath it remained untouched, covered with snow and fallen leaves, as if the tree had never grown there. This is unnatural even for the magical world, Luna. Even for a world where thestrals and nargles exist. This is something else. Something ancient and powerful. Luna, you must come. I know you're busy with your augury research. Your last letter was so enthusiastic, and I'm glad you're making such important discoveries. But this may be the most important mystery we've ever been meant to solve. Local magizoologists are helpless. They don't understand what's happening. The Swedish Ministry of Magic has sent experts, but they too can do nothing. They need a fresh perspective, and yours seems to me the right one. You see what others don't. You always have. I'm staying at the Norlius Inn in the center of Silvermora. It's a small cozy place with a large fireplace and good food. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Fjord, are kind people, though very worried about what's happening to the forest. Come as soon as you can, my dear daughter. The forest cannot wait long. Every night more disappears. With love and anxiety, your father, Xenophilius Lovegood. P.S. Bring warm things. It's much colder here than in Britain. And don't forget your magnifying glass for detecting hidden magic. I have a feeling it will be needed. Luna slowly lowered the letter onto the table, next to the unfinished drawing of an augury. Her blue eyes, usually so dreamy and calm, now burned with curiosity mixed with concern. A vanishing forest. It sounded like one of those stories her father loved to publish in the Quibbler. Incredible, fantastic, but always with a grain of truth somewhere inside. Stories that others considered fiction, but which often proved more real than anyone could imagine. But this time there was no romance or wonder-filled enthusiasm in his words. None of that excitement that usually permeated his letters when he wrote about crumplehorn snorkax or other whimsical creatures. Only worry. Deep, real worry. And father rarely worried genuinely. Even during the war, when Death Eaters held them in Malfoy Manor, he maintained some strange confidence that everything would be all right. Luna rose and approached the window. Outside, the November sun barely broke through the thick curtain of gray clouds, painting the world in shades of gray and pale yellow. A light drizzle had begun, leaving thin trails on the glass. She thought about Scandinavia's forests, which she had only seen in drawings and photographs in magical journals. Tall pines and spruces, covered with snow most of the year. Ancient magical places where creatures still lived that hadn't been seen in Britain for centuries. Places where magic was older, wilder, less tamed by human charms. And all of this was simply vanishing, being erased from reality, as if it had never existed. She returned to the table and quickly wrote a reply to her father, brief as always. I'll arrive the day after tomorrow. Be careful. Elle. She attached the letter to Arrow's leg and watched as the owl took flight into the gray sky, its gray plumage merging with the clouds until the bird disappeared from view. The following hours Luna spent in preparation. This was a ritual she had come to love over 2 years of independent research, gathering things for a journey, planning, anticipation of adventure. She carefully packed into her worn travel bag everything necessary. Several thick woolen sweaters that Mrs. Weasley had once knitted for her, a warm cloak lined with dragon hide, for gloves, and a scarf. To this she added notebooks for notes, one for drawings, another for text records, a third for magical formulas. A kit for collecting samples of magical flora and fauna. Small glass bottles, enchanted to preserve the magical properties of their contents, tweezers, scalpels, protective gloves. Several rare books about Scandinavian magic she had managed to acquire last year at an auction in magical Edinburgh. They had cost almost all her savings, but Luna never regretted books. She also took a small bottle of dirigible plum essence, just in case, which, as her father believed, helped clear the mind and see the hidden. She added her favorite magnifying glass that could detect hidden magical traces, a gift from Hermione for her last birthday. Hermione had said then, I know you don't really like magical instruments, Luna, but this one is truly useful. I promise. And she was right. That evening, when she had almost finished packing and the bag stood by the door ready for the journey, Luna suddenly remembered Hermione. They had been corresponding regularly since Luna left Hogwarts, about once a week, sometimes more often. Hermione worked at the Ministry of Magic in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, fighting for house elf rights and other magical beings. It was a hard fight against centuries-old prejudices, but if anyone could change something, it was Hermione. Though their approaches to magic were diametrically opposed, Hermione relied on facts, logic, verified sources, while Luna on intuition, faith, openness to the impossible. A true friendship had formed between them. A strong friendship based on mutual respect for each other's intellect and shared memories of war, of Dumbledore's army, of dark times when they fought together against evil. Luna sat at the table and wrote her a letter. Dear Hermione, I hope you're well and that your work is progressing. Are you still trying to convince the ministry of the importance of house elf rights? I know it's not easy. The old guard of officials can be extremely stubborn. But you've always been the most persistent person I've known. If anyone can change their minds, it's you. I'm writing because I'm going to Sweden to investigate a strange matter. Dad informed me that a forest is vanishing there. Not being cut down by wizards, not dying from disease or fire. Simply vanishing, as if being erased from reality. Trees just dissolve into the air, and along with them magical creatures disappear. This reminds me of something about transfiguration or erasure charms, but on such a scale it must be something much more powerful and ancient. Perhaps some forgotten magic or curse. Have you heard of anything similar in your work? Perhaps the ministry has mentions of such cases in historical archives? Or in the library? You've always known where to look for information better than others. I would be grateful for any information, even the smallest mention. How are Harry and Ron? Send them my greetings. And hug little Rose if you see her soon. Your friend, Luna. P.S. I'm leaving tomorrow, so if you find anything urgently important, send an owl to the Norlius Inn in Silvermora, Sweden. After sending the letter with her small owl Starlight, a tiny screech owl with enormous eyes that Luna had found injured last year and nursed back to health, she finally lay down to sleep. But sleep didn't come for a long time. She lay with open eyes, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, where portraits of friends looked down at her in the darkness. In the moonlight breaking through the window, it seemed as if they breathed, stirred, lived their own lives. Luna thought about the vanishing forest, about magical creatures losing their home, about what force could erase trees from reality, about her father waiting for her in distant Scandinavia, about the adventure that lay ahead. Finally, when the moon had risen high in the sky, transforming into a thin silver crescent among the clouds, Luna closed her eyes and sank into sleep. She dreamed of tall spruces covered with snow and frost, glowing with blue radiance. Between the trees moved semi-transparent figures, forest guardians made of bark and moss, their eyes burning with quiet green fire. They looked at her and whispered something in an ancient language she didn't understand, but which resonated somewhere deep in her soul. And above it all sounded distant voices, singing a melody older than the world's memory. The portal to Silvermora was located in London, in a small magical travel services shop on Diagon Alley. Luna arrived there early the next morning, when the street was just waking up. The first shops were opening their doors, owners sweeping doorsteps, owls delivering morning newspapers. The smell of freshly baked bread from the Golden Crumpet Bakery mixed with the aroma of magical potions from the apothecary and smoke from chimneys. The shop was called Merryweather's Magical Travels and was squeezed between a magical clothing store and a bookshop. The sign above the door depicted a rotating globe with small shimmering dots marking portals around the world. Luna pushed the door, and a bell above the entrance chimed pleasantly. Inside was cramped and cozy. The walls were hung with maps, ordinary and magical, showing not only geography but magical currents, places of power, hidden settlements. On shelves stood souvenirs from different corners of the world. Egyptian scarabs that actually moved, Japanese origami cranes that flapped their wings, African masks whose eyes followed visitors. Behind the counter sat an elderly wizard with enormous gray eyebrows that hung over his eyes like two bushes. He was reading the Daily Prophet, but set the paper aside when Luna entered. "Good morning," he said cordially. "Where are we traveling today?" "To Sweden," Luna answered. "The town of Silvermora." The wizard nodded and pulled out a thick ledger, began flipping through pages. "Silvermora, yes. It's unsettled there now, have you heard?" He looked at her over his spectacles with curiosity. "Yes," Luna answered calmly. "That's why I'm going." The wizard looked at her more carefully. Light loose hair, butterbeer cork necklace, radish-shaped earrings, an unusual cloak with strange symbols embroidered on it. "You're that Lovegood girl, aren't you?" he suddenly said. "Xenophilius's daughter? Recognized you by the earrings. I read The Quibbler. Interesting magazine. Very candid. Especially the articles about the ministry. Though many consider it mad, I've always found grains of truth there." "Thank you." Luna smiled her inscrutable smile. "Dad will be glad to hear that. He says truth often looks mad to those accustomed to lies." The wizard unexpectedly laughed. "Wise words. Well then, young lady, the portal to Silvermora costs 5 galleons. Need a valid magical passport and a declaration that you're not carrying forbidden magical items or creatures." Luna pulled out her passport. It was relatively new, obtained only 2 years ago when she left Hogwarts. In the photo she looked dreamily off to the side, and her image occasionally blinked. She filled out the declaration, assuring she wasn't carrying anything forbidden, and paid for the service. "The portal activates in 5 minutes," the wizard said, pointing to a small room in the back. "Stand in the center of the circle when the runes begin to glow, and hold your luggage tight. International portals can sometimes be a bit abrupt." Luna passed into the room. In the middle of the floor was laid a large circle of runes, which she recognized as ancient Scandinavian symbols of transportation. She stood in the center, gripping her bag tightly. Outside the window, Diagon Alley continued waking. Wizards hurried to work, children dragged parents to the sweet shop, owls flew back and forth with parcels. Suddenly the runes beneath her feet flashed with blue light. Luna felt the familiar tug at her navel, a sensation she never particularly liked, but had grown accustomed to. The world around her blurred into a whirl of colors and sounds. Cold wind whistled in her ears. It seemed she was flying through a tunnel of pure light, spinning and twisting. Colors changed, first the warm shades of London, then the cold gray of the North Sea, finally the blue-white of Scandinavia. When she finally felt solid ground beneath her feet, the air around her had become completely different. Sharp, cold, smelling of pine, snow, and something else, ozone, ice, antiquity. This was the scent of the north, wild and pure. Luna opened her eyes. She stood on a small stone platform in the center of a village, surrounded by tall wooden buildings with steep roofs covered with snow and moss. Silvermora was a typical Scandinavian magical settlement, a small town, hidden from muggles by numerous charms of misdirection and confusion. The buildings were wooden, darkened by time, with carved shutters and doors. On some roofs grew grasses and flowers, an ancient method of insulation that also gave the houses a whimsical appearance. The streets were paved with stone, covered with a thin layer of snow that crunched underfoot. The sky overhead was gray and low, as if about to fall to earth. The air was filled with moisture. It seemed snow or sleet would fall any moment. The temperature was much lower than in Britain, and Luna was glad she had brought warm things. She looked around, trying to orient herself. The platform where she stood was obviously the town's central square. Around it clustered shops and houses. Several local wizards passed by, casting curious glances at her. Guests here were obviously rare. She noticed their cloaks were much thicker and more practical than British ones, with fur collars and hoods. Colors were also different, more gray, brown, dark blue. No bright shades. On one building hung a sign with words written in runes. Luna had studied ancient runes at Hogwarts in an elective and now was pleased to find she could read them. Elfhild's Apothecary. Another building's sign read, Snar's Shop, Weapons and Protective Amulets. A third building had a sign in the shape of a goblet, the Mead and Magic Tavern. "Excuse me," Luna addressed an elderly which passing by with a basket filled with some roots. "Could you tell me where the Norlius Inn is?" The woman stopped and slowly turned. Her face was stern, carved with wrinkles, her eyes dark and attentive. She looked Luna up and down, and that gaze wasn't unfriendly but watchful. Finally she spoke with a strong accent. "There," she pointed to a street on the left, where buildings became somewhat sparser. "Third house from the edge, with a sign shaped like a northern deer. Mr. Fjord is a good man. But you're not here because of the forest?" Her voice suddenly changed, became quieter, as if she feared someone might hear. "Yes," Luna answered honestly, as always. "My father is here. He wrote to me about what's happening." The woman shook her head, and an expression of deep concern appeared on her face. "Don't go there alone, child. The forest, it's not what it was. It's changed. Something is very wrong there. We hear it at night, the cries of guardians, voices that shouldn't exist. Trees disappear, and with them disappears part of our world." She paused, then added more quietly, "Some say it's punishment, for forgetting the old ways, the old gods. Others say someone has awakened, what should have slept forever. What do you think?" Luna asked, tilting her head to the side in her characteristic manner. The woman looked at her for a long time, and in her eyes was something like respect. "I think the truth is always more complex than it seems, and that a young witch with such eyes should be careful. You see more than others, don't you?" Luna didn't know how to answer this, so she simply smiled. The woman nodded as if she had received an answer, and walked on, her figure quickly dissolving among the snowdrifts that were beginning to fall. Luna went in the indicated direction. The street indeed led to the town's edge, where houses became sparser and small gardens appeared between them, now covered with snow. The third house from the edge was a 2-story building of dark wood with large windows from which warm yellow light poured. Above the door hung a sign, a wooden carving depicting a northern deer with spreading antlers. Below the deer in runes was written, Norlius, Northern Light. In for travelers. Luna pushed the door and entered. Immediately she was enveloped by warmth. In a large fireplace at the end of the hall blazed a bright fire. The smell of smoked fish, warm bread with honey, and some spices filled the air. The hall was small but cozy. Wooden tables and benches, carved walls on which hung deer antlers and ancient maps. In a corner stood a small spruce decorated with dried berries and wooden toys. It seemed they were preparing for winter holidays here. Several wizards sat at tables, talking quietly. Luna noticed their faces were tense, and conversation stopped mid-sentence when they looked toward the windows, beyond which the distant outline of the forest was visible. Luna, a familiar voice made her turn. Xenophilius Lovegood rose from a table by the window and hurried to his daughter. He looked different, older than Luna remembered, though only a few months had passed since she last saw him. His hair had become grayer, especially at the temples. His face more tired, with new wrinkles around his eyes. But what had changed most was his gaze. Usually so dreamy and detached, now it was too alert, too awakened, as if father had seen something that wouldn't leave him in peace. "Dad," she hugged him, feeling him tremble. Whether from cold or something else, she couldn't say. "I'm so glad you came," he whispered, hugging her tighter. "So glad. You need to see this, Luna. Need to see it with your own eyes. This goes beyond everything I've known before." They sat at his table, and the innkeeper, a burly man about 50 with a thick red beard, immediately approached them. "So, this is your daughter, Mr. Lovegood?" he said with a warm smile. "Welcome to Norlius, miss. I'm Torvald Fjord, and this is my inn. What would you like? Hot soup? Tea from northern herbs?" "Both, please," Luna answered. "Thank you." When Torvald left, Luna turned to her father. "Tell me everything, from the very beginning." Xenophilius nodded and began his tale. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, as if he feared someone might overhear. He told how he had arrived here 3 weeks ago, full of hope to find proof of Crumplehorn Snorkak's existence. How the first days he spent by the local lake, observing, recording, waiting. How he met local wizards who told him about Eldskagen, the fire forest, named for the strange golden glow that enveloped trees at dawn and sunset. "At first I didn't pay attention to their stories about disappearances," he said, twisting a mug of hot mead in his hands. "I thought it was just local superstitions. You know how people love to exaggerate. But then I went to the forest myself. I wanted to see the local types of bowtruckles. They're a bit different here than in Britain, larger and more aggressive." "And what did you see?" Luna leaned closer. "The edge," Xenophilius whispered. "The literal edge of the forest, where trees simply end. Not cut down, not broken. They simply end, as if someone took and cut off a piece of reality. The ground is level, untouched, but the magical field around it trembles. I felt it with my whole body, like standing near an enormous, invisible waterfall of magical energy." He took a sip of mead, his hands trembling. "And then I saw it with my own eyes. 3 days ago in the morning. I stood at the edge, trying to understand what charms could have created such an effect. And suddenly one of the trees, an enormous spruce, Luna, a tree that remembered the Vikings, began to glow. At first barely noticeably with pale blue light. Then the glow intensified, and the tree began to become transparent. I could see through its trunk, through its branches. I saw the sky where it should have been, and within a few minutes it simply vanished, dissolved into the air like smoke." Luna listened, imagining the scene. Torvald brought them hot soup, thick, with meat and roots, smelling of spices, and tea from herbs that had a strange but pleasant aroma. "Locals say this has been happening for a month," Xenophilius continued when the innkeeper left. "At first 1 or 2 trees a week. Now more frequently. Yesterday 5 trees disappeared at once. And not just trees, Luna. Creatures are disappearing too. Forest guardians, bowtruckles, auguries, even ordinary animals, deer, wolves, birds. Everything that lives in the place where the disappearance occurs vanishes along with the trees." "What do the experts from the Swedish Ministry of Magic say?" Xenophilius laughed bitterly. "They came. 2 aurors and a magizoologist. They examined the site, took soil samples, conducted magical measurements. And you know what they found? Nothing. Worse than nothing. They found normal readings. According to their instruments, the magical field is stable, no traces of dark magic, no curses, no anomalies. Officially, according to the ministry, nothing unusual is happening. So they closed the case and left." But locals see the forest disappearing. Yes, and they're furious. They say the ministry ignores them, that capital officials don't care about remote settlements. Some have already begun talking about taking independent action. They want to go into the forest and somehow stop this themselves. But no one knows how. No one understands what's happening. Luna ate her soup, thinking about what she'd heard. Disappearances without traces, without magical anomalies, without curses. This really was strange. But she knew that often the most powerful magic left the fewest traces. Ancient charms, created by masters of the past, worked at such a deep level of reality that ordinary instruments simply couldn't detect them. "When can we go to the forest?" she asked, finishing her tea. Xenophilius looked out the window. Outside, snow was falling more thickly, and dusk was already beginning to descend, though it was only 4 o'clock. "Now, if you want, but we need to get there before dark. After sunset, the forest becomes different, more dangerous. Locals don't go there at night." "Why?" "They say they hear voices, see shadows that don't have corresponding bodies, feel the presence of something ancient and evil. Maybe it's just fear generating illusions. Or maybe something really lurks there after darkness falls." Luna stood. "Then let's go now. I need to see this with my own eyes." They quickly gathered. Luna put on her warmest cloak, took a backpack with necessary things: magnifying glass, notebook, bottles for samples, wand. Xenophilius also equipped himself, and together they left the inn. Snow was falling more thickly, large flakes dancing in the wind. The temperature had dropped even more, and Luna was glad for the fur gloves. They headed to Silvermora's outskirts, where the town ended and the forest began. The path took about 15 minutes. They walked in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Luna observed the town they were leaving behind. Houses became sparser, gardens appeared, now buried in snow, small stables for hippogriffs and winged horses. Finally they emerged into open space, and before them rose Eldskagen. Luna stopped, struck by the sight. Even now, on a gloomy snowy day, the forest was incredible. Tall pines and spruces rose to the sky, their branches covered with snow and frost that glittered in the pale light of day. But strangest was the glow, a barely noticeable golden-blue radiance that enveloped the trees, as if they glowed from within. This was an ancient forest, a forest that remembered times when magic was wild and unlimited, when wizards were just learning to tame it. But something was wrong. Luna felt it immediately, by instinct she had developed over years of working with magical creatures. The forest's edge looked broken. Trees ended suddenly, as if someone had cut off part of a vast painting. Where there should have been spruces and pines, there was only open space, level ground covered with snow that seemed untouched. But the magical field around it trembled. Luna felt it with her whole body, a vibration, an unusual tension in the air, as if she stood near an enormous magical node. Right here, Xenophilius pointed to a section about 10 meters wide between trees and open field. 3 days ago 7 trees stood here. Large, old, some were 500 or 600 years old. Now they're gone. Luna slowly approached the edge. Snow crunched underfoot, wind whistled in her ears, bringing with it the scent of pine and something else, ozone magic antiquity. She crouched at the very edge and removed her glove, touched the ground with her bare palm. The soil was cold, almost icy, but beneath her fingers she felt something more. A faint vibration, like a distant echo of some powerful magic. This wasn't dark magic. She didn't feel that cold, dead sensation that dark wizardry left behind. This was something else. Something ancient, complex, created with skill and knowledge that went beyond modern understanding of magic. Luna pulled out her magnifying glass from her pocket, that gift from Hermione. She raised it to her eyes and began carefully examining the ground. At first nothing unusual, just snow, earth, a few stones. But then when a ray of light, though so pale on this gloomy day, fell at a certain angle, she saw it. Thin, barely noticeable lines on the ground. They glowed with pale blue light under the magnifying glass lens, like thin threads woven into the very fabric of reality. Luna leaned closer, holding her breath. Runes. These were runes, engraved or somehow woven directly into the soil, so finely and skillfully that they were impossible to see with the naked eye or ordinary magical instruments. "Dad, look," she whispered. Xenophilius crouched beside her. Through the magnifying glass, the runes became more visible, complex interwoven symbols that formed part of a larger pattern. They were old, very old. The style of carving, the shape of the symbols, everything spoke of ancient origin. "These are," These are ancient Scandinavian runes, Father whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. But such a configuration. I've never seen this. These symbols, they. He fell silent, staring at the runes with such an expression on his face, as if he had seen something incredible. Luna pulled out her notebook and began carefully sketching the pattern. Her hand moved quickly but precisely, reproducing every line, every symbol. She had learned this over the years, to record what she saw before it disappeared or changed. When she finished the drawing, they both looked at it in silence. Snow fell around them, wind sang between trees, but they didn't notice. Luna studied the pattern, trying to understand its meaning. The runes formed part of a circle, but it was incomplete. Lines broke off on both sides, as if continuing somewhere further. This isn't a complete symbol, she said finally. Look, Dad. These lines have continuations. This is part of something larger. A magical circle? Xenophilius frowned. Or a sigil? Possibly. If so, there must be more such places. More points with runes. They both fell silent, pondering this. If the tree disappearances were connected to these runes, if each disappearance site was part of a larger magical pattern, then it meant only one thing. Someone or something had activated ancient magic. Magic created centuries, perhaps millennia ago. Magic with a specific purpose. We need to find other disappearance sites, Luna said, rising. See if there are runes there too. And if so, sketch them all, see the overall picture. Xenophilius nodded, but suddenly tensed. Luna felt it too, a change in the air, in the forest sounds. Birds that had been chirping somewhere deep within suddenly fell silent. The wind stilled. That strange, unnatural silence fell that always precedes something important. And then they heard it. A sound like a quiet whisper or rustling of leaves, but too clear, too meaningful for mere wind. A sound coming from deep in the forest, between trees. Luna slowly turned toward the sound, and saw a figure. A tall, thin figure stood between trees, about 20 meters from them. From this distance it was hard to make out details, but Luna saw enough. The figure was made of bark and moss, semi-transparent, so that trees behind it showed through. Its form constantly shifted, as if it were part of the forest that had temporarily taken humanoid shape. Two dark voids were where eyes should be, two dark voids that looked directly at them. A forest guardian, Xenophilius whispered, and in his voice was awe. The figure didn't move, just stood and watched, and then, as quietly as it had appeared, began retreating deeper into the forest. But before disappearing completely, it raised what served as its arm, a long branch covered with moss, and pointed. Not at them, but down, at the ground beneath their feet, at the runes. And then Luna understood. The guardian knew about the runes, about the magic, about what was happening, and it wanted them to know too. The figure dissolved between trees, vanished as if it had never been. Only silence remained, and snow that continued falling. It showed us the runes, Luna said quietly. It wanted us to find them. But why? Why would a guardian help us? Because the forest is dying, and with it the guardians are dying. They need help. Our help. Xenophilius nodded, and they both crouched again to more thoroughly study the runes. Luna drew several more sketches from different angles, recording every detail. And then one particular rune caught her eye. It was somewhat separated from the others, as if standing on its own. The form was complex, unusual, a combination of several symbols into one. Luna had seen this rune before. Somewhere. But where? She closed her eyes, trying to remember. Memories scrolled through her mind. Years at Hogwarts, the library, ancient runes lessons with Professor Babbling, countless books she had read in the years after school. And suddenly she remembered. Last year, she had been in the Library of Magical Research in London, looking for information about auguries. She had accidentally stumbled upon an old book about Hogwarts founders, an enormous tome in blue binding, its pages yellowed with age. There was a chapter about Rowena Ravenclaw, about her travels in youth, about her study of magic across Europe. And on one of the pages was a drawing, a schematic depiction of a magical symbol that Ravenclaw used in her research. This very rune. Luna's eyes snapped open. Her heart beat faster. She looked at the symbol on the ground, then at her drawing in the notebook, and there was no doubt. Dad, her voice was barely audible, almost a whisper, but so tense that Xenophilius immediately turned to her. This rune. I know where I've seen it before. Where? In a book about Rowena Ravenclaw. The silence that fell after these words was heavy. Xenophilius stared at his daughter, his eyes widening with shock and excitement. Ravenclaw? But that means that this magic is connected to her, Luna finished. To one of Hogwarts' founders. To the most outstanding witch of her time. These are her runes, Dad. Her magic. Snow fell more thickly. The wind strengthened, howling between trees, bringing with it cold and approaching darkness. But neither Luna nor Xenophilius noticed. They stood at the edge of the vanishing forest, looking at the ancient runes, and understood they had stumbled upon something much greater than just the mysterious disappearance of trees. They had found traces of Rowena Ravenclaw herself. Traces of magic created 1,000 years ago. Magic that for some reason had awakened now and was taking the forest tree by tree, creature by creature. And most frightening was that they didn't know why. Why now? Who or what had activated this ancient magic? And most importantly, what was its true purpose? They returned to the Norlius when night had fully enveloped Silvermora. The snow had stopped falling, and the sky had cleared, revealing countless stars, more than Luna had ever seen in Britain. The cold had intensified, the air becoming sharp and transparent, so that each breath left a cloud of vapor. In her room on the second floor, Luna spread all her notes across the bed. Drawings of runes, observation records, sketches of the forest guardian. She studied them in the light of a magical lantern, trying to piece together a complete picture. Ravenclaw's runes, the vanishing forest. Ancient magic awakened after 1,000 years of slumber. It was all connected, but how exactly? She took out her quill and began writing a letter to Hermione, more detailed and longer than the first. She described the runes, their form, the connection to Ravenclaw. She asked her to find any information about Rowena's travels to Scandinavia, about her research, about the magical symbols she might have left behind. Hermione had access to ministry archives, to libraries closed to ordinary visitors. If anyone could find answers, it was her. After sending the owl, Luna lay down but again couldn't sleep. In the darkness of the room, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the inn, muffled voices below, the creak of stairs, the distant howl of wind. And in her mind swirled images, the vanishing tree, the translucent figure of the guardian, the blue glow of runes. Finally, sometime near dawn, she fell asleep, and she dreamed of the forest again. But this time the dream was different. She stood in the heart of Eldskagen, surrounded by enormous trees that glowed from within with golden light. The ground beneath her feet was covered with runes, thousands of runes, interweaving to form a complex pattern. And in the center of it all stood a tall woman in blue robes, with a diadem on her head. Her face was indistinct, blurred, but Luna knew who it was. Rowena Ravenclaw, the founder, the Great Witch. The woman turned to her and spoke, but the words were in some ancient language Luna didn't understand. But the tone was clear, a warning, a caution, something important that Luna needed to know. She woke at dawn with a feeling of anxiety. The dream had been too vivid, too real to be just a dream. It was a message, perhaps from the forest itself, perhaps from something else. After breakfast, hot porridge with honey and berries, thick slices of bread with butter, and strong tea, Luna and Xenophilius set out for the center of Silvermora. Father said he knew someone who could help them understand the runes. Egil Stormwind, the oldest rhenologist in all of Scandinavia, a man who had devoted his entire life to studying ancient symbols and their magic. His shop was located on the edge of the main square, a small building of dark wood, almost completely hidden between two larger houses. The sign above the door was simple, runes that formed the words "Knowledge of the Ancestors." The windows were darkened with heavy dark curtains, and light barely filtered from within. When they entered, Luna was immediately struck by the smell. Old paper, candle wax, dried herbs, something bitter and earthy, perhaps mandrake root or some other magical root. The shop was cramped, filled with shelves that bent under the weight of books. Some volumes looked so old it seemed they might crumble to dust at any moment. On the walls hung parchments with runic diagrams, amulets, strange artifacts whose purpose Luna couldn't guess. Behind the counter sat an elderly wizard, perhaps the oldest person Luna had ever seen. His face was wrinkled like a dried walnut, and long gray hair and beard, braided into two long plaits, reached almost to his waist. But his eyes were so blue and clear that it seemed as if they reflected the very sky on the clearest winter day. These were the eyes of someone who had seen much, knew even more, and feared neither life nor death. "Egil," Xenophilius greeted him. "This is my daughter Luna, a magizoologist. I wrote to you about her." The old wizard stood, slowly, leaning on a carved staff that served as his walking stick. He looked at Luna for a long time, and that gaze was penetrating, investigative, as if he saw not just her appearance but something deeper. Her soul, perhaps, or the magic that lived within her. "Yes," he finally said, his voice like the rustling of old parchments. "I see it. You have the eyes of one who sees more than others, girl. The eyes of one who is not afraid to look at what others consider impossible." Luna didn't know how to respond to this, so she simply nodded. "We found runes," she said without preamble, pulling out her notebook, "near the place where trees vanished. Ancient Scandinavian runes, arranged in a pattern." Egil took the notebook, put on round spectacles, and began carefully studying the drawings. Minutes stretched in silence, broken only by the quiet crackling of candles and distant sounds from the street outside. Finally, he raised his head, and on his face was an expression that could be called concern. "Where exactly did you see this?" His voice became sharper. "At the edge of the forest, where trees disappeared 3 days ago," Luna answered. Egil nodded silently, then walked to the shelves filled with books. His fingers, long, bony, but surprisingly nimble, glided over the spines as if reading the inscriptions by touch. Finally, he pulled out an enormous tome in a dark green binding with runes on the spine. The book was so old that the leather on the cover had cracked, and the pages had yellowed to the color of old honey. He placed the book on the counter, and even in the dim light of the shop, Luna saw the title engraved in gold. Magic of the Northern Lands, Runes, Sigils, and Ancient Spells. Below the title was a date, 1247. "This book," said Egil, carefully opening it, "is one of the few that survived from the Middle Ages. It describes magical systems created by great wizards of the past, including..." He found the right page and turned the book to them. On the yellowed parchment were drawn runes, complex, interwoven schemes, accompanied by text in ancient Scandinavian and Latin. Luna leaned closer and felt her breath catch. The runes on the page were almost identical to those she had copied yesterday. The same lines, the same interlacings, the same configuration. "These are detector runes," Egil said quietly. "A magical seeker, created to find lost or hidden objects of great magical power. This system was developed by Rowena Ravenclaw nearly 1,000 years ago, when she traveled through Scandinavia." "She was here." Xenophilius leaned over the book. "In Sweden?" "Yes. Ravenclaw spent several years here in her youth, before she helped found your Hogwarts. She studied the ancient magic of the Norse runic systems, ways of interweaving magic with nature, and she created several of her own magical constructions, which she left here. The detector is one of them." "Why did she create it?" Luna asked. "What was it supposed to find?" Egil slowly turned the page. On the next one was a drawing, a schematic depiction of a diadem, decorated with runes and precious stones. Below the drawing was text in Latin, which Luna struggled to translate in her mind. "The second diadem. Repository of northern wisdom. Left to protect the lands when the time comes." "A diadem," Xenophilius whispered, and in his voice was a mixture of awe and excitement. "So the legends were true. Ravenclaw really created a second diadem." "Not created," Egil corrected. "Divided. The famous diadem of Ravenclaw, which she wore at Hogwarts, was only half. The other half, its magical twin, a resonator, remained here in Scandinavia. 2 parts of one complete magical construction. Ravenclaw believed that concentrating such powerful magic in one place was too dangerous, so she divided the power between 2 artifacts." Luna listened, trying to grasp the scale of what they had learned. The Ravenclaw diadem had been one of the most powerful magical relics in history. It enhanced intelligence, wisdom, clarity of thought. During the war, Harry had found it, and it had been destroyed in the Room of Requirement when Crabbe's fiendfire accidentally set it ablaze. Luna remembered that night, the smoke, fire, chaos of battle. But if there was a second half, a magical twin. "Someone activated the detector," she said. "Someone is searching for the diadem, and the runes are consuming the forest's magic to fuel the search." "Yes," Egil nodded gravely. "The Ravenclaw detector was created 1,000 years ago, when the planet's magical field was different, more stable, richer. Then it could function without harming the environment. But now the magical field is weaker, and the detector is forced to draw energy from wherever it can. From trees, from the earth, from the very magical creatures that live in the forest. How much of the forest will disappear before the detector completes its search?" Xenophilius asked. Egil was silent for a long time, looking at the runes in the book. Then he said, "If allowed to continue working, if the activation isn't stopped, possibly the entire forest. Eldskagen has stood here for 2,000 years. It is home to hundreds of species of magical creatures. It is part of the magical balance of all Scandinavia. If it disappears... He didn't finish, but there was no need. Luna understood. An ecological catastrophe. A magical catastrophe. A disruption of balance whose consequences could be felt throughout Northern Europe. How do we stop the detector? She asked. There are two ways. Egil closed the book carefully, with respect for its antiquity. The first, find all activation points, all runic nodes, and physically destroy them. Erase the runes, break the magical circle. This will stop the detector, but also destroy Ravenclaw's work. The knowledge embedded in this system will be lost forever. And the second way? Find the diadem before the detector does. If the artifact is found, the detector will automatically shut down, having fulfilled its purpose. But this means searching for something that was hidden 1,000 years ago by a master of magic whose wisdom was legendary. Luna and Xenophilius exchanged glances. Neither option was simple. Destroying the runes meant losing part of the magical heritage, knowledge that could be invaluable. But searching for the diadem, when even the powerful Ravenclaw detector couldn't find it quickly. We need a map, Luna said. A map of all the places where trees have disappeared. If we see the overall pattern, we might understand the detector's logic, understand where it's searching, how it works, and possibly where the diadem might be hidden. Egil went to the back room and returned with a large parchment, a detailed map of Eldskagen and its surroundings. He unrolled it on the counter. Luna saw that the map wasn't just geographical. It marked magical currents, places of power, ancient ruins, areas with particularly strong magical fields. Here, Egil began marking places on the map with red ink, showing the disappearance sites. And here, a total of 15 points over the past month. The last disappearance was last night, for trees on the eastern edge of the forest. Luna leaned over the map, carefully studying the marks. At first they seemed scattered randomly, several in the north, several in the south, several more in the center. But then, when she began imagining lines between the points, a pattern emerged. Give me a pencil, she requested. Egil handed her a thin graphite rod, and Luna began carefully connecting the dots. First one to another, then in groups, looking for a pattern. And suddenly she saw it. If you connected the points in a certain way, they formed a shape, an irregular circle with branches extending from the center to the edges. Similar to an ancient magical sigil she had seen in books about runic magic. This is a search sigil, she whispered. Ravenclaw used geometric magic. Each disappearance point is a node of the detector. When all nodes are activated, the sigil completes, and the detector receives enough energy to indicate the exact location of the search object. Xenophilius and Egil leaned over the map, studying the lines Luna had drawn. But look, she pointed at the diagram. The sigil is incomplete. 4 points are missing here. If the detector continues working, these places will also disappear. And when the last point activates, the detector will complete scanning and point to the diadem, Egil finished. But the forest may not survive this. Luna quickly estimated where the next points should be, based on the sigil's geometry. She drew 4 circles in pencil. One here on the northern edge, near the ancestor stone, that ancient ruin. Another almost in the center of the forest, where the great tree grows. The third in the east, near Silverstream. The fourth in the south, near Wolf Hill. When will the next disappearance occur? Xenophilius asked. Luna studied the intervals between previous marks on the map, trying to find a pattern. At first, disappearances occurred once every 3 or 4 days. Then more frequently. The last 3 disappearances, almost daily. The detector is accelerating, she said. The closer to completion, the faster it works. I would say tonight, or tomorrow. The silence that fell was heavy. They all understood that time was running out. Something had to be done, and done quickly. I need to talk to the forest guardians, Luna said. They've lived in the forest for centuries. They might know something we don't. They might remember legends, stories about the diadem, about the place where Ravenclaw hid it. But the guardians rarely speak to people, Egil shook his head. They only trust those who truly understand the forest, who see it not as a resource, but as a living being. They spoke to me yesterday. Luna looked at the old rhnologist. They showed me the runes. They know I want to help. Egil looked at her for a long time, then slowly nodded. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps they do see an ally in you. But be careful, girl. The forest is changing. The magic living in it is becoming unstable. Even the guardians may be unpredictable. They left the shop around noon. Outside, the sky was clear but the air cold and sharp. Luna and Xenophilius headed to the inn to prepare for a journey deeper into the forest. But on the main square, a crowd had gathered. About 20 wizards stood in clusters, loudly discussing something. Luna recognized some of them. Shopkeepers she had seen yesterday, the elderly witch who had warned her at the portal, other locals. Their faces were tense, voices angry. "We can't just sit and wait. The ministry does nothing. They've abandoned us. We must do something ourselves. Enter the forest and destroy whatever's causing the disappearances." Luna and Xenophilius stopped at the edge of the crowd. A tall wizard about 40 years old, with a red beard and stern face, stood in the center of the group. Luna recognized him as the owner of the magical weapons shop. "I tell you," he thundered, "this is a curse. Someone has cursed the forest, and it's devouring it. We must find the source and destroy it before all of Eldskogin disappears." "But how?" someone from the crowd asked. "We don't know what to look for. Then we'll search for everything suspicious. Strange signs, magical anomalies, anything unusual. I propose gathering a group and combing through the forest. Find what's doing this and destroy it." Several voices shouted in support. Luna felt concern. She understood what these people meant. They would search for magical signs, and they would find the runes. Ancient, delicate runes of Ravenclaw, created with incredible skill and knowledge. And they would destroy them, not understanding what they were doing. She stepped forward. "Wait!" The crowd turned to her. The red-bearded wizard frowned. "Who are you?" "My name is Luna Lovegood. I'm a magizoologist from Britain. I'm investigating what's happening with the forest." "A Brit," someone snorted. What could she know about our forest? But the red-bearded man seemed more open. "Speak. What have you found?" Luna gathered her thoughts. She needed to explain, but in a way that they would understand the importance of not destroying the runes prematurely. "The disappearances are connected to ancient magic," she said clearly. "Magic created by Rowena Ravenclaw 1,000 years ago. It's a magical detector, designed to search for a lost artifact. It's not evil, not a curse, just outdated. It consumes too much energy because the magical world has changed over 1,000 years." "A detector?" the red-bearded man grimaced. "You're saying some ancient magical machine is devouring our forest?" "Yes, but if you simply destroy it without understanding how it works, you could make things worse. You could trigger a magical backlash that would destroy even more, or lose invaluable knowledge that Ravenclaw left for future generations." "Knowledge?" A voice from the crowd was sarcastic. "What do we care about knowledge when our home is disappearing?" Luna realized she was losing this argument. They were frightened, angry, desperate. They needed action, not lectures about preserving magical heritage. "Give me 2 days," she said. 2 days to find a way to stop the detector safely. If after 2 days the situation doesn't improve, do what you want." The red-bearded man looked at her suspiciously. "Why should we trust you? You're not even from here." "Because I understand the magic working here. And because I don't want the forest to disappear, just as much as you do. I've spent years studying magical creatures, their homes, ecosystems. Eldskogin is unique. If it disappears, the world will lose something irreplaceable." Silence. Then someone from the crowd, the elderly witch who had warned Luna yesterday, spoke. "I saw this girl. She has the eyes of one who sees truth. Perhaps we should give her a chance." The red-bearded man pondered, then reluctantly nodded. "Fine. 2 days. But if after 2 days the forest continues disappearing, we'll go in there and destroy everything we find magical." "Understood." "Understood," Luna nodded. The crowd began dispersing, though many cast distrustful glances at Luna. When the square emptied, Xenophilius placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. 2 days is very little time." "I know." Luna looked toward the forest, its dark mass visible at the edge of town. "That's why we must hurry." They entered Eldskogin around 2 in the afternoon. This time they went deeper, not to the edge, but toward the heart of the forest. Luna wanted to find the forest guardians, talk to them, learn what they remembered about Ravenclaw's time, about the diadem, about the magic that was now tearing their home apart. The forest was different during the day, less threatening, but no less magical. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating complex patterns of light and shadow on the snow. The air was filled with the scent of pine, moss, cold earth. Occasionally they heard sounds, the crack of branches, the rustle of wings, the distant howl of something that could be a wolf, or might not be. They walked for an hour, perhaps more, delving deeper into places where the trees became older, taller, where the snow lay thicker, and the light turned greenish from the multitude of coniferous branches overhead. Finally, Luna stopped in a small clearing. In the center grew a tree, not the largest in the forest, but something about it caught her attention. The bark was covered with moss, and between the roots peeked small blue-white flowers that, as Luna knew, shouldn't bloom in winter. "We're here," she whispered. "How do you know?" Xenophilius looked around. "I feel it. This place, it lives differently. The magic here is thicker, older." She stepped to the center of the clearing and knelt, placing her palms on the snow. She closed her eyes and opened her mind, as she had done with magical creatures over the years. Not trying to control, not trying to capture, just opening up, allowing the world around her to sense her presence, her intentions. And the forest responded. At first it was a barely noticeable feeling, as if someone was watching from behind the trees. Then the sounds began to change. The rustling of leaves became more rhythmic, like breathing. The wind sang quietly, a melody Luna couldn't recognize, but which resonated somewhere deep in her soul. And then they appeared. First one, a tall translucent figure between the trees, made of bark, moss, and light. Then another, and another. Finally, Luna and Xenophilius were surrounded by 5 forest guardians. They stood motionless, their forms constantly shifting, as if they couldn't quite decide whether to be trees or beings. Their eyes, dark voids and wooden faces, looked at Luna with something like curiosity. "You returned," said one of them in a voice like the creaking of old branches. It was the same guardian who had spoken to her yesterday. "You saw the runes. You know." "Yes." Luna slowly rose, making no sudden movements. "I know they're Rowena Ravenclaw's runes. A detector, created to search for the diadem. It's consuming the forest's magic to fuel itself." "Yes," the guardian nodded, and in his movement was some ancient sadness. "The forest is dying, tree by tree. We feel it. Each disappearance is like a part of ourselves being torn away." "Do you remember Ravenclaw?" Luna asked quietly. 1,000 years ago, when she was here." The guardians stirred, their forms trembling. The one who spoke slowly nodded. "We remember. Forest guardians live long, very long. Some of us remember times when the first humans came to these lands, when magic was wild and free. Ravenclaw, yes, we remember her. Tell me," Luna stepped closer. "Please. It might help save the forest." The guardian was silent for a long time. The others were also silent, as if consulting among themselves without words. Finally he spoke, and his voice became different, deeper, more resonant, as if he spoke not only with his own voice, but with the voice of the entire forest. "She came young, a witch from the southern lands, seeking knowledge. She spent months here, studying our ways, our runes, the magic that flows through trees and earth. She was wise. She didn't take by force, but asked permission. She didn't demand, but listened." He fell silent, and Luna felt the tension in the air ease slightly. The guardians trusted her enough to share memories. "She created something," the guardian continued. "Great magic, woven from runes and nature. She said it was for protection, for preserving wisdom for future generations. She created an artifact, a crown of silver and stones, filled with the magic of knowledge. And she left it here in the heart of the forest, protected by runes and spells." "Where?" Xenophilius couldn't restrain himself. "Where did she leave the diadem?" The guardian turned to him, and in his gaze was something like regret. "We don't know. Ravenclaw didn't trust even us completely. She said that when the right time came, the worthy would find what she had left, and the unworthy would never reach it, even if they searched for 1,000 years. But the detector," Luna said. "She created the detector to find the diadem if it was lost." "Yes, but the detector wasn't meant to activate itself. It was to be awakened only by those who truly understand Ravenclaw's magic, who know the right words, the right gestures, the right intentions." "Someone awakened it," Luna whispered. "Someone found a way to activate the detector. But who? And why?" The guardians stirred again, their forms becoming more distinct, as if they were concentrating. "We saw him," the guardian said. "A man. He comes at night, when others sleep. He stands by the ancient stones and whispers spells. We feel his pain. He is not evil, but desperate. And desperation makes people blind to the consequences of their actions." "Can you show me where he goes?" Luna asked. The guardian nodded and slowly turned, pointing deeper into the forest. "North of the great tree, where 3 ancient stones stand with runes. He comes there. But be careful. The magic there is unstable. The detector is gaining strength. One more disappearance, and it may become uncontrollable. Luna and Xenophilius exchanged glances. They had found their mysterious activator. A desperate person, blind to consequences. Someone who needed to be stopped. Thank you. Luna bowed to the guardians as her intuition suggested, with respect, as to elders and wiser ones. You've helped us more than you know. Save the forest, child of light, the guardian said, and his form began to dissolve, merging with the trees around. Save our home, or we will all disappear, as if we never existed. One by one, the guardians dissolved into the forest, leaving Luna and Xenophilius alone in the clearing. The wind sang again between the branches, but now this melody sounded like a plea, like a supplication. They returned to Silvermora when day was already slanting toward evening. The sky was overcast with clouds again, and the air was filled with the promise of snow. Luna felt fatigue, not so much physical as emotional. The conversation with the guardians, the feeling of their pain, their fear for the disappearing forest, it all weighed on her. At the inn, a surprise awaited them. At their usual table by the window sat a small owl with a letter in its beak. Starlight, Luna's owl. She had arrived with a reply from Hermione. Luna took the letter, stroked the owl's head, and unrolled the parchment. Hermione's handwriting was neat but quick. She had written in haste. Dear Luna, your second letter amazed me. Ravenclaw runes. This is incredible. I immediately began searching in the archives and found several important things. First, I can confirm, Rowena Ravenclaw did indeed travel through Scandinavia in 990 to 998, approximately. There are mentions of this in several ancient manuscripts. She studied Nordic magic and runic systems. Some historians believe it was there that she gained the knowledge she later used to create her famous diadem. Second, I found an interesting note in one of the ministry documents. In 1897 in Norway, a similar case of forest disappearance was recorded. Then too, detector runes and search for a lost Ravenclaw artifact were mentioned. The investigation suddenly stopped, and no reasons were given. But in the personal notes of one of the investigators, I found a sentence. The detector shut down on its own when the object was found and moved. The forest was saved, but the artifact was lost again. This means, Luna, that someone already found the diadem in 1897, but then lost or hid it again, perhaps in a different place. Third, and this is most alarming, I found mention that the magic of Ravenclaw's detector has a peculiarity. The longer it works, the more aggressive it becomes. If allowed to complete a full scan, it could cause a cascading effect. Disappearances would begin spreading beyond the initial area. One forest, then another, then entire regions. Luna, be very careful. What you're dealing with may be far more dangerous than it seems. If you need help, let me know. Harry offers to come with Aurors, but I told him you probably want to try solving this peacefully first, with care and hope. Hermione. P.S. I'm attaching a copy of that document from 1897. Maybe you'll find something useful. Luna slowly lowered the letter. The diadem had already been found, in 1897, but then lost or hidden again. This meant the detector could be stopped by finding the artifact. But where was it now? And the second, more alarming thought, a cascading effect. If the detector wasn't stopped in time, the disappearances would spread. Eldskagen was just the beginning. What does Hermione write? Xenophilius asked. Luna handed him the letter. Father read, and his face grew increasingly concerned. A cascading effect, he whispered. Merlin, this could destroy the entire magical ecosystem of Scandinavia. That's why we must find who activated the detector, Luna said decisively. Tonight, the Guardians said he comes to the ancient stones. We'll go there and stop him. This could be dangerous, Xenophilius placed a hand on her shoulder. If he's desperate, he may not listen to reason. Then we'll make him listen. Luna looked out the window, where dusk was already beginning to fall. We have no choice, Dad. Tomorrow the local wizards will go into the forest and destroy the runes. That could trigger the very cascading effect we're trying to avoid. Tonight is our only chance to do this right. Xenophilius was silent, then sighed and nodded. All right, then we need to prepare. Protective amulets, restorative potions, a spare wand just in case. And we need to tell someone where we'll be. If something goes wrong, we'll tell Eggle, Luna said. He'll understand. They quickly ate hot soup and bread, something simple that would provide energy, then went up to their rooms to pack the essentials. Luna took everything that might be needed. Her magnifying glass, notebook, protective amulets against dark magic, the bottle of northern light essence that Eggle had given them, a spare set of warm clothes. She checked her wand. It was ready, responding to her magic as always. When she finished, she heard a knock at the door. Father entered, dressed and ready. "I've written a letter to Eggle," he said. "Explained where we'll be. If we don't return by morning, he'll come looking." "Good." Luna nodded and stood. "Then let's go." But as she approached the door, Father suddenly embraced her. Tightly, in a way he hadn't for many years. "I'm proud of you, Luna," he whispered. "Your mother would be proud too. You do the right things, even when they're hard." Luna felt something tighten in her throat. She rarely thought about her mother. It was too painful to remember. But now, in this moment, she felt her presence. As if Pandora Lovegood was somewhere nearby, watching, smiling her dreamy smile. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. They left the inn when night had fully fallen. The moon hid behind clouds, and the only light came from Silvermora's magical lanterns and stars that occasionally peeked through breaks in the clouds. The cold was piercing, and their breath turned into white clouds of vapor. They headed toward the forest, and Luna felt her heart beating faster with each step. Ahead lay the unknown, a confrontation with a person who was ready to destroy an entire forest for something they believed in. A confrontation that could end in any way. But she couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when the forest needed her help. They entered Eldskagen, and the forest greeted them with silence. Unnatural, heavy silence that lay on their shoulders like a wet blanket. No sounds of animals, no rustling of leaves. Even the wind seemed afraid to disturb this silence. They walked for an hour, using a magical lantern for light, but keeping it dim so as not to draw unnecessary attention. The trees around them seemed taller at night, more threatening. Their shadows intertwined into strange shapes, and the frost on branches glittered in the lantern's light like thousands of tiny eyes watching them. Finally, they emerged onto a small elevation, and Luna saw them, 3 enormous ancient stones covered with runes. They stood in a triangle, each about 3 meters high, dark and ancient. The runes on their surface glowed with a dim blue light, pulsing in rhythm with something invisible. And in the center of the triangle, between the stones, stood a figure. Luna immediately saw it wasn't a local wizard. The cloak was dark, nothing bright or practical as worn here. The figure held a wand pointed at the ground, where runes glowed brighter. Lips moved, speaking an incantation in an ancient language. "Stop!" Luna shouted, stepping forward. The figure jerked around, and she saw the face. A middle-aged man, haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and gray hair. His face was the face of someone who hadn't slept for a long time, who had suffered for a long time. But what struck Luna most were his eyes. In them burned despair, so deep and dark it hurt to look at. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse. "What do you want?" "We know what you're doing," Luna said, raising her hands to show she wasn't going to attack. "You activated Ravenclaw's detector. You're searching for the diadem, but you're destroying the forest. Magical creatures. An entire ecosystem." The man gripped his wand tighter. "You don't understand. I must find it. I must." "Why?" Luna stepped closer, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Why do you need the diadem? Why are you willing to destroy the forest for it?" The man was silent, but Luna saw the struggle on his face. Finally he spoke, and his voice trembled. "My daughter. She's ill. A curse. An ancient curse is taking her mind, her memory. No healer can help. But Ravenclaw's diadem, legends say it can restore the mind, return what was lost. I must find it. I must save my child." And suddenly everything fell into place. Luna understood. Not greed, not evil, not a thirst for power. Love. Desperate, blind love of a father for a child. Love that made him ready to destroy everything in his path. She felt something tighten in her chest. She understood him. Understood this pain. She too had lost her mother. Knew what it meant to watch someone you love slip away forever. But she also knew this was wrong. One couldn't save one person at the cost of hundreds of other lives. "What is your name?" she asked quietly. The man looked at her with surprise. "Magnus. Magnus Eriksson." "Magnus," Luna stepped closer. "I understand your pain. I truly do. But what you're doing, it won't save your daughter. It will destroy hundreds of lives. And it could trigger a cascading effect that will spread disappearances far beyond this forest." "I don't care," Magnus exclaimed, and in his voice was something broken. "Do you think I care about the forest when my only child is dying? When she forgets my name, forgets who she is, forgets everything? But she wouldn't want this. Luna said quietly. She wouldn't want you destroying the world for her. No child would want that. Magnus looked at her, and tears glistened in his eyes. You don't know. You don't know what it's like to watch your child fade away day by day. How she looks at you with empty eyes and doesn't recognize you. How she asks, "Who are you?" And you realize you've lost her forever. Luna felt her own eyes moisten. She wanted to say something that could ease his pain. But what could one say to such grief? How old is she? She asked gently. 19, Magnus' voice broke. She's only 19. She wanted to become a magizoologist like you. She loved creatures, nature, magic. And now she lies in a hospital and doesn't even remember what magic is. Xenophilius stepped forward, and Luna saw his face was also wet with tears. How long does she have? He asked quietly. Magnus lowered his head. The healers say a month, maybe less. After that, the curse will consume her completely. She'll become an empty shell, alive but not alive. The silence was heavy, filled with pain and despair. Luna looked at this man, at his broken figure, and felt her heart tearing. How could she stop him? How could she say his daughter must die to save the forest? But she also knew she couldn't let him continue. Couldn't let him destroy Eldskagen and everything living in it. Couldn't risk the cascading effect that could spread across all of Scandinavia. Magnus, she said, and her voice was firm but compassionate. Even if you find the diadem, there's no guarantee it will help. Curses are different. Some of them are irreversible, even by the most powerful artifacts. I must try, he looked at her desperately. I must at least try. Don't you understand? If I don't try, if she dies knowing I could have done something. But at what cost? Luna looked at the stones, at the runes glowing ever brighter. How many lives is one life worth? Even if it's your daughter? Magnus didn't answer. He just stood there, trembling, his wand still pointed at the ground, at the runes. And suddenly Luna felt it. A change in the air. A pulse of magic. The runes beneath Magnus' feet blazed brighter, their blue light becoming almost blinding. What's happening? Xenophilius looked around anxiously. Luna pulled out her magnifying glass and looked at the runes. Through its lens, she saw them pulsing, feeding on magic, not just from the earth but from Magnus himself. The detector was consuming his life force, using his despair as fuel. Magnus, stop, she cried. The detector is feeding on your magic. It's killing you. But Magnus wasn't listening. His eyes were closed, his lips continued whispering the incantation. He was too deep in the ritual, too committed to his goal. Luna felt panic. If Magnus completed activation of another node, the detector would become even more powerful. Another part of the forest would disappear, and they would be one step closer to the cascading effect. She did what she always did when logic didn't work. She trusted her intuition. She stepped directly into the circle between the stones, where Magnus stood in the middle of the runes. Xenophilius shouted something behind her, but she didn't stop. She approached Magnus and placed her hand on his shoulder. The magical shock was instantaneous. The detector's energy struck her, passed through her like an electrical discharge. She saw flashes, images, memories not her own. She saw a girl with dark hair, laughing, running between trees. She saw the same girl lying in bed, looking with empty eyes. She saw Magnus' face as he cried over her, begging her to remember him. Pain. Such pain. The pain of a father losing a child piece by piece, day by day. But Luna didn't let go. She gripped his shoulder tighter and poured her magic into him. Not aggressive, not attacking, but calming. Magic of understanding, compassion, connection. The kind of magic she had used to calm frightened magical creatures for years. Magnus, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the detector's magic. I see her. I see your Eileen. She was beautiful, kind. You loved her very much. Magnus shuddered. His eyes opened, filled with tears. But think, Luna continued softly, if she were here now, if she saw what you're doing, what would she say? Would she want you destroying the forest, the creatures, everything around for her? Magnus' voice broke. She loved nature, magical creatures. She wanted to protect them. Yes, Luna nodded. And now you're destroying the very thing she loved. You're betraying her memory, Magnus. Even if you save her body, you'll lose who she was. That girl who loved the forest and creatures. Magnus looked at her, and something in his gaze began to change. Despair fought with understanding. Love fought with awareness of consequences. But I can't just give up, he whispered. She's my daughter. I'm not asking you to give up. Luna squeezed his shoulder. I'm asking you to look for another way. A way that doesn't destroy what she loved. Help us stop the detector, and we'll help you find another way to save Eileen. Perhaps there are other artifacts, other healing methods. Give us a chance. I've already tried everything. Not everything, Xenophilius interjected, approaching closer. You haven't asked for help from those who truly understand ancient magic. Haven't turned to researchers, historians, those who may know more about curses than healers. We have connections, Magnus. Friends in the ministry, at Hogwarts, all across Europe. Give us 2 days. Just 2 days. We'll find a way to help your daughter without destroying the forest. Magnus looked at them both. Luna saw him wavering, saw reason fighting despair. The runes beneath their feet continued glowing, but already fainter. Without his active support, the detector was losing power. Finally, Magnus lowered his wand. His shoulders sagged, and he suddenly seemed much older, more tired. 2 days, he whispered. She has 2 days. If you find nothing by then, we will. Luna said this with such confidence, she almost believed it herself. I promise. The runes beneath their feet dimmed. The magic dissipated, and suddenly the forest came alive again. The wind rustled between branches. Somewhere far away an owl hooted. Quiet sounds of nightlife could be heard. Magnus fell to his knees, and Luna saw all the tension, all the despair of recent weeks pour out of him. He cried, heavily, uncontrollably, like someone who had held it all inside for too long. Xenophilius crouched beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. He said nothing, just was there, and Luna stood, looking at the sky through the tree branches, where clouds had dispersed, revealing countless stars. They had stopped the detector, saved the forest, at least for now, but ahead was still much work. They returned to Silvermora around 3 in the morning. Magnus walked with them, silent and stunned. Luna saw he was exhausted, physically and emotionally. Activating the detector had taken much of his strength. At the Norlius Inn, they settled Magnus in a separate room. Torvald Fjord, the innkeeper, asked no unnecessary questions, just brought hot tea and a blanket. The North understood when it was better to be silent. When Magnus had fallen asleep, Luna and Xenophilius sat at their usual table. The inn was empty, too late for guests. Only the fireplace crackled quietly, casting warm reflections on the wooden walls. What now? Xenophilius asked, wearily rubbing his face. Now we search for a way to help Eileen. Luna pulled out her notebook and began writing. We need detailed information about the curse. When it was cast, how it works, what symptoms. Then we contact everyone we know. Hermione can search the ministry archives. Neville might know about magical plants that help against curses. Harry has connections at the International Confederation of Wizards. And if we find nothing? Luna looked at her father. We will. We must. Xenophilius nodded, but Luna saw doubt in his eyes. 2 days. So little time. She wrote several urgent letters to Hermione, to Neville, even to Professor McGonagall at Hogwarts. Perhaps the school library had information about ancient curses. She sent owls into the night, watching them disappear into darkness. When she finally went up to her room, the sky was already beginning to lighten in the east. Dawn was approaching, bringing a new day, a day when she had to find answers. Luna lay on the bed without undressing. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep for at least a few hours. But sleep wouldn't come. In her mind swirled thoughts about Magnus, about his daughter Eileen, about the forest, about the diadem, about everything that had happened in recent days. And suddenly she remembered something, a phrase from Hermione's letter. In 1897 the diadem was found and moved. Moved. Not destroyed. Not hidden again in the forest. Moved somewhere. Where would such a powerful relic be moved? She got up and retrieved all her notes again, reread Hermione's letter, reviewed her drawings of the runes, studied the forest map with marked disappearance sites, and suddenly something clicked in her mind. The pattern. It showed not just the diadem's location then, 1,000 years ago. It showed a trajectory, a path along which the diadem had been moved. If she was reading the runes correctly, the diadem had been moved from the forest's center northward, to the mountains. 2. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked around. Outside was already morning. The sun had risen above the horizon. She had been so absorbed in research that she hadn't noticed 2 hours pass. Yes, she responded. The door opened. Torvald entered with an anxious face. Miss Lovegood, you'd better come downstairs. Something's happened. Luna's heart froze. She grabbed her wand and ran downstairs. In the hall stood Torvald with an anxious face, holding a scrap of parchment in his hand. Miss Lovegood, he said. I went to check on your father's room this morning. He's not there. Only this note on the table. Luna took the parchment with trembling hands and read. The handwriting was hasty, untidy, obviously written in great haste. I'm sorry. I couldn't wait. I saw it in dreams. I know where it is. The diadem is real. I'm going for it. Don't try to find me. By the time you read this, I'll already be there. Found it. The diadem is real. XL. Luna reread the note twice, 3 times, trying to understand. XL Xenophilius Lovegood. Her father. Luna reread the note twice, 3 times, trying to understand. XL Xenophilius Lovegood. Her father. She jerked her head up. When did he leave? I don't know. Torvald shook his head. I saw him last night. This morning I went to his room, empty. Only this note on the table. Luna felt cold fill her inside. Father had gone. Gone to search for the diadem alone. Without her. Without preparation. Into a forest growing increasingly dangerous. She rushed to the door, but Torvald stopped her. Wait! Where are you going? To find him. Luna was already throwing on her cloak, checking her wand. He doesn't know how dangerous it is. The detector may still be active. The magic is unstable. He could. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't want to voice her worst fear. Torvald and his wife, Mrs. Fjord, who had come down at the noise, exchanged glances. I'll go with you, Torvald said. I know the forest better than many. I can help. And I, Mrs. Fjord spoke up, a sturdy woman with a determined face. 2 isn't enough for such a search. Luna wanted to object, say it was too dangerous. But she knew they were right. Alone she couldn't search the entire forest. Especially if Father had gone deep into the mountains, as she suspected. Thank you, she whispered. But before they could leave, the inn door burst open. Cold wind rushed in, and with it, a group of wizards. The red-bearded man Luna had seen yesterday on the square led them. His face was red with anger. 2 days have passed, he thundered. Another section of forest disappeared last night. We saw blue light, heard sounds. You promised to stop this, Brit. And it continues. Luna felt the floor drop from under her. Another disappearance? But they had stopped Magnus. The detector should have shut down. Show me, she said, trying to keep calm. Show me where this happened. The group set out for the forest. Luna, Torvald, Mrs. Fjord, the red-bearded wizard named Snar, and 3 other locals. Magnus stayed at the inn. He was still too weak after yesterday. When they reached the site of the new disappearance, Luna immediately saw something was wrong. This wasn't at one of the points she had predicted. This was in a different place, outside the detector's pattern. She crouched, pulled out her magnifying glass, examined the ground, and found no runes. None at all. The place was clean. This isn't the detector, she whispered. What? Snar frowned. This isn't Ravenclaw's detector. There are no runes here. This is something else. Or, fear gripped her heart. Or someone had activated the detector in another place. Someone who knew about the runes. Someone who had enough knowledge about Ravenclaw's magic. Someone like her father. No, she whispered. Dad, what have you done? Luna stood by the new disappearance site, feeling panic slowly filling her from within. Father was gone. Gone to search for the diadem alone. And now somewhere in the forest another disappearance had occurred. Outside the pattern, beyond all logic of the Ravenclaw detector. She pulled out her notebook and quickly marked a new point on her forest map. Looking at the overall picture, she tried to find a pattern. The old 15 points formed a sigil of seeking, but this new point stood apart, northwest of the main pattern, closer to the mountains. This makes no sense, she muttered under her breath, studying the diagram. What makes no sense? Snar stepped closer, his red beard covered with frost from the cold morning air. The Ravenclaw detector operates on a clear geometrical system. Each activation point must be part of the overall sigil. But this, she pointed to where they stood, is outside the system, as if someone activated the runes separately, without understanding the general structure. Or deliberately, Torvald interjected. Someone might have specifically stepped outside the pattern. Luna looked at him. Why? To hide the true purpose. So we'd think it was part of the detector, when in reality it's something else. The thought made Luna freeze. Torvald was right. If someone wanted to use Ravenclaw's magic for their own purposes, the best way would be to hide it among legitimate detector activations. Magnus had activated 19 points over a month. But what if some of those activations weren't his work? She quickly flipped through the notebook pages to her notes from the conversation with Eggle. He'd said 15 disappearances over the past month. But on the map she'd seen yesterday, 17 points were marked, including the last 2 days. Someone else was activating the runes, in parallel with Magnus. I need to return to Egil, Luna said sharply. Immediately. Something's wrong with the overall picture. What about your father? Mrs. Fjord asked. You wanted to search for him. Luna hesitated. Every cell in her body screamed for her to rush into the forest searching for Xenophilius. But if her suspicions were correct, if someone was manipulating the entire situation, she first needed to understand the full picture. Torvald, she turned to the innkeeper. Can you gather a group to search for father? Search the northern part of the forest, closer to the mountains. I think that's where he went. Torvald nodded. I will. I'll take Snar and several other reliable people. We'll find him. Be careful, Luna squeezed his hand. The magic there is unstable. If you see anything strange, blue glow, runes, anything unusual, don't approach closely. Just remember the place and come back for me. She ran back to the village, her heart pounding in her chest. The cold morning air burned her lungs, but she didn't slow down. Every minute could be crucial. The shop Ancestral Knowledge greeted her with semi-darkness. Egil hadn't yet opened for visitors. But Luna knocked insistently, and a minute later the elderly rhenologist opened the door. His blue eyes immediately narrowed when he saw her face. Something's happened. It wasn't a question. Yes, Luna entered, shaking snow from her cloak. I need that map again, and detailed information about each disappearance, exact dates, time of day, whether there were witnesses. Egil asked no unnecessary questions. He simply went to the back room and returned with the map and a thick journal. These are the records of local rangers, he said, placing the journal on the counter. They patrol the forest daily. They document everything unusual. Luna unfolded the map and began comparing it with the entries in the journal. The first disappearance, a month ago, November 13th, around midnight. The second, November 16th, also at night. The third, November 19th. At first the intervals were 3 days. Then they began to shorten. The latest disappearances were occurring almost nightly. This corresponded to what she knew. The detector was accelerating, approaching completion. But then she noticed something strange. 5 disappearances out of 17 had occurred not at night, but during the day. At various times, early morning, noon, evening. And all 5 were in places that didn't quite fit the geometry of the sigil. Egil, Luna raised her head. You said the Ravenclaw detector could only be activated by those who know the correct words and gestures. Could someone activate it accidentally? No, the old wizard shook his head. Ravenclaw's runes are protected. Deep understanding of her magical system and conscious will to activate them are required. It's not something that can be done by mistake. So if the detector activates, it's always a deliberate action? Yes. Luna looked at the map again. 19 disappearance points. Magnus had activated the detector over the course of a month, trying to find the diadem for his daughter. But 5 points didn't fit his pattern. 5 points, activated by someone else. By someone who was also searching for the diadem. Who else knows about Ravenclaw's diadem? She asked. Who else might have learned about the detector? Egil thought for a moment. Legends about the second diadem are known to some collectors of magical artifacts. There are people who dedicate their lives to searching for lost relics. Some of them are noble researchers. Others are obsessed. They see artifacts not as part of history to be preserved, but as sources of power to be seized. Such people are dangerous. They're ready to destroy everything in their path for what they desire. Luna felt cold inside. An obsessed collector. Someone who knew enough about the detector to activate it. Someone who was acting parallel to Magnus, using his desperation as cover for their own actions. Have there been any strangers in the village recently? She asked. Someone who was interested in the forest, runes, the magical history of the region. Egil frowned, trying to remember. About 2 months ago there was a man. Introduced himself as a historian from Germany, studying ancient Scandinavian magic. Stayed at the inn for a week. Often came here, bought books, asked about legends. He was especially interested in Ravenclaw and her time in Scandinavia. What did he look like? Tall, gaunt. About 50 years old, perhaps older. Dark hair with gray. Dressed elegantly, not locally. Wore a silver ring with an unusual stone. I noticed because the stone glowed with a faint green light. A magical artifact, without doubt. What was his name? Wolfgang Krieger. But whether that's his real name. Egil shrugged. Luna wrote the name in her notebook. Wolfgang Krieger, a German collector who appeared just before the disappearances began. This couldn't be a coincidence. Do you know where he went after he left the village? No, but I remember that on the last day before departure, he was buying maps of the mountainous areas north of the forest. He asked about ancient ruins, caves, places where valuable things might be hidden. North, mountains, exactly where Luna suspected her father had gone. She rolled up the map and stood. Thank you, Egil. You've helped greatly. Girl, the old wizard placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. Be careful. If this Krieger truly is an obsessed collector, he may be extremely dangerous. Such people stop at nothing. I know, Luna squeezed his hand. But my father is there. I must find him. She left the shop and almost collided with Magnus. He stood by the door, looking somewhat better than last night, but still pale and exhausted. I heard what happened, he said. Your father is gone, and there was another disappearance. Yes, Luna nodded. And I think I know who's behind it. You weren't the only one activating the detector, Magnus. Someone else was doing it in parallel. A collector named Wolfgang Krieger. Magnus flinched at the name. Krieger? Wolfgang Krieger? You know him? Heard of him? In circles of magizoologists and historians he's known. A wealthy German collector, obsessed with ancient artifacts. They say he has one of the largest private collections of magical relics in Europe. But they also say that some of those things he obtained, not entirely by legal means. A dark wizard? Not necessarily, but ruthless. If he's decided something should belong to him, he'll get it at any cost. Human lives don't concern him. Luna felt her fear for her father intensify. If Xenophilius encountered Krieger somewhere in the forest. I'm going to search for father, she said decisively. You stay here. You need rest. No, Magnus shook his head. I'm coming with you. It's my fault all this started. I activated the detector, drew attention to the forest. If something happens to your father because of my actions, it's not your fault. Luna placed a hand on his shoulder. Krieger was here before you. He started this, but you can help finish it. Let's go together. They set out north an hour later. A small group, Luna, Magnus, and Mrs. Fjord, who insisted she knew the mountain paths better than many. Torvald and Snar were already somewhere in the forest, searching for Xenophilius from the other side. The forest greeted them with silence. The same unnatural silence Luna had felt the previous night. Even the wind seemed afraid to rustle between the branches. The trees stood motionless, covered with snow and frost, as if frozen in eternal waiting. They walked for hours, climbing higher into the mountains. The forest grew sparser, the trees lower and more twisted. Snow lay in thicker layers, and walking became harder. Luna felt the cold penetrating through her cloak, felt her leg muscles burning from the strain. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Around noon they emerged onto a small plateau. From here a view opened of all of Eldskigen. An enormous dark green carpet spread below. Luna saw Silvermora in the distance, small houses that seemed like toys from this height. She saw the disappearance sites, lighter spots in the dark mass of forest, like holes in the fabric of reality. Look, Mrs. Fjord pointed ahead. Luna turned and saw. A cave, an entrance into the cliff, half hidden by growths of thorny bushes. But this was no ordinary entrance. Around it, carved directly into the stone, runes glowed. Blue Ravenclaw runes, identical to those Luna had seen in the forest. He's here, she whispered. They carefully approached the cave. Luna drew her wand, spoke. Lumos, and faint light burst from the tip. She peered inside. The cave went deep into the mountain, the walls smooth, as if polished by a master's hand. On the floor, carved in stone, runes stretched, a path leading further into darkness. They pulsed with the same blue light as the external runes. It's a trap, Magnus stood beside Luna. Too obvious, too easy to find. I know, Luna nodded, but my father is there, and perhaps Krieger too. We must enter. Then we'll be careful. Mrs. Fjord drew her wand, and Luna was surprised to see it wasn't like an ordinary one. The dark wood was covered with ancient runes, and at the tip a small crystal glimmered. Seeing Luna's look, the woman smiled. My grandmother was a Nordic witch. She passed some secrets to me. They entered the cave slowly. Luna walked first, lighting the way. Behind her Magnus, then Mrs. Fjord, who covered the rear. The temperature dropped as soon as they moved away from the entrance. The air became damp, smelling of stone and something else, ozone magic. The cave twisted, going ever deeper. Sometimes they passed side tunnels, dark abysses leading into the unknown. But the runes on the floor showed the way, a straight line forward, into the depths of the mountain. Finally the tunnel widened, and they emerged into a large natural hall. The ceiling rose high above their heads, lost in shadow. Along the walls ran small streams of water, murmuring quietly, echoing in the silence. And in the middle of the hall, Luna froze, holding her breath. In the middle of the hall stood an enormous stone, perhaps 3 meters high, irregular in shape, covered with runes from base to peak. The runes glowed so brightly that they illuminated the entire hall with flickering blue light. And before the stone, on a stone pedestal, lay the diadem. Even from a distance Luna saw its beauty, silver that shimmered in the light of the runes, sapphires embedded in the metal that burned with inner fire. The form was elegant, refined, the work of a master who understood not only beauty, but also magic. Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, the second half of the legendary artifact. But this didn't strike Luna most. What struck her most were 2 figures by the stone. One tall, elegant, in a dark cloak of good quality, a man about 50 with dark hair with gray. On his hand a silver ring with a green stone glimmered. Wolfgang Krieger. He stood between the pedestal and the second figure, his wand pointed forward. And the second figure, "Dad!" Luna rushed forward, but Magnus grabbed her hand, stopping her. Xenophilius Lovegood stood on the other side of the stone, also holding his wand. His cloak was torn, his face scratched, but he was alive and conscious. And he looked at Krieger with an expression of determination that Luna rarely saw on her father's face. "Luna, no!" shouted Xenophilius, seeing them. "Don't approach. It's a trap." Krieger slowly turned to them. His face was calm, almost polite. But in his eyes was something cold, calculated. The eyes of a person for whom others were merely obstacles on the path to a goal. "Ah, guests," he said with a barely noticeable German accent. "How lovely. Miss Lovegood, I presume? Your father told me much about you while we were waiting." "Waiting for what?" Luna stood motionless, not taking her eyes off Krieger. "For the detector's completion, of course," Krieger smiled. "You see, the diadem is protected. Direct approach is impossible. Ravenclaw's runes will create a barrier that will repel anyone who tries to take the artifact without permission. But if the detector completes its scan, if the final activation point triggers, the barrier will weaken. And then, he made an elegant gesture with his hand toward the diadem. Then the artifact can be taken," Luna finished. "You activated the detector. Not Magnus. You." "Oh, Herr Eriksson also made his contribution," Krieger nodded toward Magnus. "His desperate attempts to find the diadem helped me. He activated most of the points, drawing attention to the forest, allowing me to work unnoticed. For that I'm grateful to him." Magnus paled with anger, but Luna restrained him with a movement of her hand. "You destroyed the forest," she said quietly. "Magical creatures. All this for one relic." "For the most powerful relic in Europe," Krieger corrected. "Ravenclaw's diadem contains the knowledge of centuries. Wisdom that cannot be measured in gold. With it I will complete my collection. Become the greatest expert on magical artifacts in the world." "You're mad," Xenophilius whispered. "No, Mr. Lovegood. I am dedicated. There is a difference. You journalists write about magical things. I preserve them, study them, understand them. Which of us does more important work?" Luna felt the magic in the hall changing. The runes on the stone began pulsing faster, their light becoming brighter. Something was approaching. Some culmination. "The final activation point," she whispered. "It's here. In this hall." "Very perceptive," Krieger nodded. "Yes, the detector's center has been here all along. In the cave where Ravenclaw hid her artifact. Each external point fed the magic, prepared the system. And now, when the energy has reached critical level, the barrier falls." He raised his wand, directing it at the stone. He began speaking an incantation in an ancient language, not Norwegian, not English, but something older. A language Luna had heard only in dreams. The runes flared. The light became so blinding that Luna had to cover her eyes with her hand. A hum began, deep, resonating, coming from the earth itself. "No!" Xenophilius rushed forward, but Krieger waved his wand, and an invisible force threw him back. Father struck the wall and slid down, unconscious. "Dad!" Luna rushed to him, but Mrs. Fjord stopped her. "Wait," the older woman whispered. "Look." Luna looked at the stone. The barrier truly was falling. She saw how the runes one by one began to fade. But something was wrong. The magic wasn't behaving as it should. Instead of a smooth disappearance of the barrier, The runes were flaring, crackling, as if overloaded. "He's doing it wrong," Magnus whispered beside her. "Krieger doesn't fully understand Ravenclaw's magic. He's forcing the detector to work too quickly." And suddenly Luna understood. Eggle had spoken of a cascade effect. If the detector completed a full scan too quickly, it could trigger a chain reaction. Disappearances would spread, go out of control. Krieger didn't care about this. He wanted the diadem, and he wanted it now. Consequences didn't interest him. "We must stop him." Luna stepped forward, raising her wand. But Krieger was ready. He turned, and his wand flashed. A red beam burst from the tip, flying straight at Luna. She cried, "Protego!" and a shield appeared just in time, deflecting the attack. "Do not interfere." Krieger thundered, and for the first time his calm cracked, showing the obsession hidden beneath the elegant exterior. "I've worked on this for years. Searched for the diadem across all Europe. No one will stop me now." He attacked again, and this time with greater force. Luna barely managed to dodge. The spell flew past, struck the cave wall, crumbling a chunk of stone. Magnus and Mrs. Fjord also drew their wands, standing on two sides of Luna. Krieger was alone, but more powerful. His magic was precise, controlled, the magic of a person with decades of experience. The hall filled with flashes of light, sounds of battle. Spells flew back and forth, bounced off walls, left burns on stone. Luna dodged, blocked, counterattacked, using everything she'd learned in Dumbledore's army, everything she remembered from the Battle of Hogwarts. But Krieger was too strong, too experienced. One of his spells broke through Magnus' defense, throwing him aside. Another struck Mrs. Fjord, and she fell unconscious. Only Luna remained. She stood between Krieger and the diadem, breathing heavily, her wand trembling in her hand. Behind her father still lay unconscious. Magnus tried to rise, and Mrs. Fjord wasn't moving. "You are a brave girl," said Krieger, and there was almost respect in his voice. "But inexperienced. Step aside, and I will allow you to leave." "No," Luna shook her head. "I cannot allow you to take the diadem. Not like this. Not at the cost of lives." "What lives?" Krieger spread his hands. "Trees? Creatures? They are part of nature. Nature is eternal, it will recover. But the knowledge in the diadem is unique, irreplaceable. The forest guardians lived there for 2,000 years. Luna's voice was quiet but firm. They remember times when magic was wild. Each of them is a living library of history knowledge. You destroyed most of them. That knowledge is lost forever, Mr. Krieger. Forever. Something flashed in Krieger's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or even a shadow of doubt. But it disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Sentimentality, he waved his hand. You are young. When you become older, you will understand that there are things more important than feelings. The runes on the stone had faded almost completely. A few more minutes, and the barrier would vanish entirely. Krieger would be able to take the diadem. Luna felt despair filling her. She couldn't stop him by force, couldn't convince him with words. What remained to her? And suddenly she remembered the forest guardian's words. Ravenclaw said that when the needed time comes, the worthy will find what she left, and the unworthy will never reach it. Worthy, not strong, not intelligent, not obsessed. Worthy. Luna lowered her wand. Krieger narrowed his eyes in surprise, tensed, ready for attack. But she didn't attack. She simply turned to the stone, to the diadem lying on the pedestal. What are you doing? Krieger stepped forward, but something stopped him. Some invisible boundary he couldn't cross. Luna didn't answer. She stretched her hand toward the diadem. Slowly, carefully, not trying to grab, not trying to seize. Simply touching, as she would touch a sacred relic in a temple. Her fingers stopped a few centimeters from the silver. She felt the diadem's magic, ancient, wise, complex. Rowena Ravenclaw's magic, woven with runes and knowledge 1,000 years ago. And she whispered, I don't want to possess you. Don't want to use your power. I simply want to protect what you guard. The forest, the creatures, the balance that has existed for 1,000 years. The diadem flared. Bright blue light spiraled from it, enveloped Luna, passed through her. She felt everything. Felt Ravenclaw's magic, her wisdom, her knowledge. Also felt her love of nature, of balance, of life in all its forms. Ravenclaw hadn't created the diadem for power. She'd created it for understanding, for harmony between magic and nature. And in this moment Luna understood what had to be done. She didn't take the diadem. Instead she placed her palms on the stone, on the runes that still glowed faintly. closed her eyes and opened her mind, as she'd done with the guardians, with magical creatures over the years. Allowed the stone's magic to flow into her, to connect with her own magic. And she saw the entire system, the detector, runes throughout the forest, the connections between them, the magical currents that fed them. Saw how Krieger had broken the balance, forcing the detector to work too quickly. Saw the cracks in the system, places where magic was ready to go out of control, trigger that same cascade effect Hermione had warned about. But she also saw how to fix it, how to restore balance, how to stop the detector not by destruction, but by completion, but completion proper, controlled. Luna began whispering. Not spells, words. Simple words in an ancient language she'd never studied, but which flowed through her from the diadem, from Ravenclaw's magic itself. The runes on the stone flared again, but differently. Not sharply, not aggressively, but softly, smoothly. Light flowed from the stone along the floor, along the walls, exited the cave. Luna felt it spreading throughout the forest, touching each runic point, each activation site. The detector was completing its work, but not as Krieger wanted. It was completing by restoring balance, returning to the forest what it had taken. No! Krieger rushed forward, but the barrier that had previously protected the diadem now protected Luna. It threw him back, and the collector fell, his wand falling from his hand. The light grew brighter, filled the entire hall. Luna felt the magic reaching culmination, felt the detector making a final pulse, completing millennia of work. And then everything stilled. Silence. Absolute silence. Luna opened her eyes. The runes on the stone had faded. The diadem still lay on the pedestal, but its light had changed, become warmer, golden calm. She turned. Krieger lay on the floor, looking at her with an expression of shock and, perhaps, understanding. Behind her father began coming to. Magnus sat pressing a hand to his head, and Mrs. Fjord slowly rose. "What have you done?" Krieger whispered. "Completed what Ravenclaw began," Luna answered quietly. "The detector fulfilled its work. Found the diadem, but not so someone could take it, so that it would be safe, so that balance would be preserved." She approached her father, helped him sit. Xenophilius embraced her, trembling. "I thought he would kill you," he whispered. "When I saw you here." "Everything's all right, Dad." Luna squeezed him tightly. "Everything's all right." Krieger slowly rose. His elegance had vanished. The cloak was torn, hair disheveled, face pale. But most changed were his eyes. The obsession had disappeared, leaving something like emptiness. "For years," he said quietly, looking at the diadem. "For years I searched for it. Studied, researched, planned. And all for nothing." "Not for nothing," Luna approached him. "You learned much. Understood much about Ravenclaw's magic. But you missed the most important thing." "What exactly?" "That wisdom is not possession of knowledge. It's understanding when not to use it. When to leave things as they are, because that's right." Krieger looked at her for a long time, then slowly nodded and walked to the cave exit. At the doorway he stopped. "You are wise for your age, Fräulein Lovegood. Wiser than me." Perhaps Ravenclaw meant exactly such people by worthy. He left, and his steps echoed in the tunnel until they fell silent completely. They emerged from the cave when the sun was already declining towards sunset. Golden light fell on the snow, painting the world in shades of pink and orange. The air was clean, sharp, but Luna felt something else in it, hope perhaps. At the entrance Torwald and Snar awaited them with a small group of local wizards. Seeing them, the innkeeper sighed with relief. "Thank Merlin. We saw light from the cave, didn't know what to do." "Everything's all right," Luna smiled tiredly. "The detector is stopped. The forest is safe." They began descending down to Silvermora. The path was long, and Luna felt exhaustion catching up with her. But she also felt something else. Lightness. As if the burden she'd carried these past days was finally lifted. When they entered the forest, Luna noticed something. The trees, they were glowing. Not as brightly as before, but warmer, more alive. Eldskagen's magic was recovering. And suddenly figures appeared between the trees. Forest guardians, dozens of them, more than Luna had seen together. They stood quietly, watching as the group passed. Luna stopped before one, the one who'd spoken with her earlier. "The forest lives," he said, and in his voice was something like joy. "You fulfilled your promise, child of light. Saved our home." "Not entirely," Luna shook her head. "Part of the forest is lost forever. Some of you too." "Yes, but the rest survived. Thanks to you. The forest will remember. We will remember." The guardian extended what was his hand and touched Luna's forehead. She felt warmth, peace, something ancient and good that penetrated her, left a trace in her soul. "You will always be welcome in Eldskagen," he whispered. "Always a friend of the forest." The guardians dissolved between the trees, leaving the group in silence that was calm and alive. At the Norleys, and they were greeted as heroes. Torvald arranged a feast, modest but sincere. Meat, bread, honey, warm ale and tea from northern herbs. Local wizards who'd earlier looked at Luna with suspicion now approached, shook her hand, thanked her. But Luna couldn't fully relax. She thought about Magnus, about his daughter Island. A promise remained a promise. The 2 days she'd given him had almost passed, and she still hadn't found a way to help. Late in the evening, when the feast ended and most guests had dispersed, Luna sat at her usual table, studying notes about the curse that Magnus had given her earlier. Father slept upstairs, exhausted by the day's events. Suddenly an owl flew to the window. Starlet, her little Scops owl, carried a letter. Luna immediately recognized Hermione's handwriting. She unrolled the parchment and began reading. With each sentence her heart beat faster. "Luna, I found something. In the old archives of St. Mungo's, there's a record of a similar curse. It can be neutralized with the help of a special potion, the Elixir of Memories. The recipe is extraordinarily complex, but Hogwarts has all the ingredients. Professor Slughorn agreed to prepare it. He says the potion will be ready in 3 days. If Magnus' daughter can be brought to Hogwarts, we'll try. Not a guarantee, but a chance. A real chance. Tell Magnus we're doing everything possible. Hermione." Luna pressed the letter to her chest, feeling tears filling her eyes. A chance. They'd found a chance for Island. She rose and ran to Magnus' room. Knocked on the door. He opened almost immediately. Apparently, he also couldn't sleep. "Luna, has something happened?" She extended the letter to him. Watched as he read, as his face changed, from hope to disbelief to joy, so pure and bright it was painful to watch. "A chance," he whispered. "She has a chance." "Yes," Luna smiled through tears. "You must immediately go to Britain. Collect Island from the hospital and bring her to Hogwarts. You have 3 days while the potion prepares." Magnus rushed to her and embraced her, tightly, desperately, as one embraces someone who saved your life. "Thank you," he whispered again and again. "Thank you, Luna. I will never forget this. Never." The next morning Magnus departed. Luna saw him to the portal, watched as he vanished in a whirl of magic, heading to Norway where his daughter awaited in hospital. She stood in Silvermora's square, looking at the forest on the horizon. Eldskagen was still there, dark green and magnificent. Damaged but alive. It would survive. Recover. As nature always recovered after human errors. Ready to return home? Xenophilius approached her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes," Luna nodded. "But first..." She turned and headed to the edge of the village, where the forest began. Father walked after her, not asking where. They stopped at the place where Luna first saw the runes. The ground was clean now, the runes had faded, the detector had completed its work. But Luna felt that magic was still here, quiet and calm. She crouched and placed her palm on the ground. Whispered, "Thank you. For the trust. For the opportunity to help. I will never forget Eldskagen." Wind rustled between the trees, and it seemed to Luna she heard an answer, a distant whisper, an ancient song sung before people learned magic. She rose and returned to her father. Together they walked back to the village, to the portal waiting to take them home. But before entering the portal shop, Luna turned one last time, and saw him, the forest guardian between the trees, watching her. He raised a hand in a farewell gesture. Luna smiled and waved in response. Then she entered inside, and the door closed behind her. A week later Luna received another letter. From Magnus. He wrote that Island had begun recovering. The elixir of memories worked. Slowly but surely. She already remembered his name. Remembered who she was. Remembered how she loved magical creatures and dreamed of studying them. The letter also contained an invitation. When Island fully recovered, they both would like to come to Luna, to thank her personally. Perhaps together visit Eldskagen, see the forest she'd saved. Luna smiled, reading the letter. Then she approached the window of her house near Ottery St. Catchpole. Outside was winter, snow falling in large flakes, covering the world with a white blanket. But Luna knew that under the snow, deep in the earth, life waited. Waited for spring to bloom again. Like Eldskagen. Like Island. Like all things given a chance. She returned to the table where her notes, drawings, research lay. Took a quill, and began writing a new article for the Quibbler. The magic of balance, how Rowena Ravenclaw's ancient runes saved a Scandinavian forest, and why wisdom is more important than strength. Outside the window snow fell, but in Luna's heart was warmth. She knew that ahead lay many more adventures, many mysteries to solve, many magical creatures to study. But now, in this moment, she simply wrote, and was happy. 3 weeks had passed since Luna returned from Sweden. 3 weeks during which she tried to return to ordinary life, to her research on auguries, to articles for scientific journals, to quiet days in her house near Ottery St. Catchpole. But something had changed. She had changed. In the morning she woke and remembered the forest, the blue glow of runes, the voices of the forest guardians, Magnus' despair, Krieger's obsession, and the diadem, beautiful, ancient, filled with the wisdom of centuries. She hadn't taken it, hadn't even touched it, but something of that magic remained in her, deep inside. Understanding that was difficult to express in words. A sense of connection to something greater, more ancient, more important than any single person or creature. Today she sat at her desk, trying to finish an article about emotional patterns in auguries. But the words wouldn't come together. Thoughts constantly returned to Eldskagen, to the runes, to everything she'd experienced. Finally Luna sighed, set down her quill, and took out another notebook, the one that held all her notes about Sweden. Drawings of runes, detector diagrams, records of conversations with the guardians. She began turning the pages, studying them again, trying to understand something that still remained unclear. The detector had completed its work, balance restored. But why did she feel that something remained unfinished? Suddenly her gaze fell on one of the pages, a drawing of that special rune she'd first noticed at the forest's edge, the Ravenclaw rune that differed from the others. Luna had thought then that it was simply part of the detector system, a special symbol to mark the central point. But now, looking at it again, she noticed something else. The rune's form wasn't simply a symbol of seeking. It was a combination of two runes, seeking and protection, a detector that was simultaneously a guardian. Luna rose and approached her bookshelf. Among many volumes about magical creatures and ancient magic, she found the one she'd taken with her to Sweden, an old book about runic systems. She opened it to the chapter on Ravenclaw. She read, and with each sentence, understanding grew. Ravenclaw's detector wasn't merely a search system. It was a test, a way to determine whether the person activating it was worthy of finding what they sought. Each point activation gathered information about intentions, about motives, about the very soul of the one using the magic. Magnus had activated the detector from love, from despair, but from love. His soul was pure, even if his actions were mistaken. Krieger had activated from obsession, from greed to possess, to control. His soul was empty, filled only with the desire to have more. And when they both reached the cave, reached the diadem, it was their very souls that determined which of them could touch the artifact. Luna understood now why she'd been able to. Not because she was stronger or more intelligent, but because she didn't want the diadem for herself. She wanted it for the forest, for the creatures, for balance. Ravenclaw had created a system that chose the worthy itself, and Luna had passed that test without even realizing its existence. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Luna started, returning to reality. She went and opened it. On the threshold stood Xenophilius with an enormous smile on his face and a stack of freshly printed copies of the Quibbler in his hands. "Luna, look!" He extended a magazine to her. On the cover was a drawing, an artistic rendering of Eldskagen with forest guardians among the trees, and above it in large letters, "The Magic of Balance, How Luna Lovegood Saved a Scandinavian Forest." Exclusive account. "Dad," Luna took the magazine. "We agreed the article would be about runes and Ravenclaw's magic, not about me." I know, Xenophilius waved his hand. "But an editor has a right to creative freedom. Besides, people want to read about heroes, Luna. And you're a hero, whether you like it or not." Luna sighed but smiled. Father would never change. And perhaps that was good. She opened the magazine and began reading her article. Father had edited the text somewhat, added more drama than she'd wanted, but the essence remained unchanged. A story about balance, about wisdom, about how true power lies not in possession but in understanding. "It's good," Luna said, closing the magazine. "Thank you for publishing it." "I'm the one who should thank you," Xenophilius embraced her. "For saving me in that cave. For everything." They stood like that for several minutes, in the silence of the cozy house, listening to the wind rustling outside the windows. The next day Luna received an unexpected visitor. An owl brought a note from Egil Stormwind. He asked her to return to Silvermora. Something important had happened in the forest. Something she had to see. Luna didn't hesitate. She gathered her things, and a few hours later stood in the familiar square in the center of the Scandinavian village. Snow fell more heavily than a month ago, and the cold was more piercing. But the village looked calmer, more alive. The tension that had hung in the air during her first visit had vanished. Egil waited for her by his shop. He looked excited, his blue eyes glowing. "Thank you for coming," he said when she approached. "You need to see this." "What happened?" "The forest," the old rhinologist smiled. "It's recovering, but not just recovering. It's changing, becoming different." They set out for the forest together. Along the way, Torvald, Mrs. Fjord, and Snar joined them. All of them wanted to show Luna what they'd discovered. When they entered Eldskagen, Luna immediately felt the difference. The forest's magic had become denser, richer. The air vibrated with it, as if the very space between the trees was filled with living force. They walked to one of the points where trees had previously disappeared. Luna remembered this place, an empty patch, bare ground, the painful absence of life. But now, Luna froze, not believing her own eyes. In the place of disappearance, trees were growing. Not old ones, not those that had been there before. New ones, young saplings about a meter tall, with bright green roots and branches covered with young needles. But most astonishing was that these trees glowed, not with Eldskagen's usual golden light, but with blue, the same shade as Ravenclaw's runes. "How?" Luna approached closer, crouched by the nearest sapling. "We don't understand either," Egil said. "They appeared a week ago. In every place where trees disappeared, new ones grew. All glow the same way. All contain magic we've never seen before." Luna carefully touched the sapling. She felt the magic, pure, ancient, filled with knowledge. This was Ravenclaw's magic, woven with the forest's own magic. The detector hadn't simply completed its work. It had transformed the forest, left in it part of itself, part of that wisdom embedded 1,000 years ago. "They grow quickly," Mrs. Fjord added. "In a week they've grown a meter. Local magizoologists say they've never seen anything like it." "It's a gift," Luna whispered. "Ravenclaw left a gift. Not just the diadem, not just the detector, but something more, a way to heal what was damaged." She rose and looked around. Between the trees, as always unnoticed, stood forest guardians. There were more of them than before. Far more. New guardians, born from new trees, young and curious. One of them, the one who'd spoken with Luna earlier, stepped forward. "The forest is born again," he said. "Different but alive. The runes didn't destroy us. They changed us, made us stronger, wiser. Now we remember not only the past. We see the future, understand balance as never before." Ravenclaw knew, Luna smiled. She knew this would happen. The detector wasn't only a search. It was evolution, a way to raise the forest to a new level. But only if someone worthy completed the process, the Guardian added. If Krieger had taken the diadem by force, the detector would have destroyed everything. But you completed it correctly, and the forest received its reward. Luna stood among the new trees, feeling the magic envelop her, warm and alive. She understood now the full picture. Ravenclaw hadn't simply hidden the diadem. She'd created a system that had to wait, for centuries, if necessary, until someone appeared who understood the true meaning of wisdom. Not knowledge for knowledge's sake, not power for power's sake, but balance. Harmony between magic and nature, between desire and necessity, between taking and giving. That evening at the Norleys, in a small celebration took place. Local wizards gathered together, not to discuss crisis, but to celebrate recovery. Luna was seated in the place of honor, and she, embarrassed, accepted thanks and toasts. When the celebration quieted and most guests had dispersed, Snar approached Luna, that red-bearded wizard who'd initially looked at her with suspicion. "Miss Lovegood," he said, holding something wrapped in cloth. "We wanted to give you something, as a keepsake." He unwrapped the cloth, and Luna saw an amulet, a beautiful carved pendant of dark wood in the shape of a leaf. On it were carved runes, the same ones that glowed in the forest. "It's made from a branch of one of the new trees," Snar explained. "The trees allowed us to take a small part. The amulet will protect you and remind you that you always have a home here in Silvermora." Luna took the amulet, feeling magic pulse in the wood, warm, alive, filled with light. "Thank you," she whispered, putting on the pendant. It lay perfectly on her chest, as if it had always belonged to her. The next morning, before departure, Luna visited the forest one last time. She went alone, unaccompanied, simply to say goodbye. She stood in the clearing with new trees, listened to the silence that was filled with life. Birds sang among the branches. Wind rustled the leaves. Somewhere far away sounded a wolf's voice, not threatening, but melodious, part of the forest's symphony. Return when you wish. The guardian's voice seemed part of the wind itself. The forest will remember you. Always. Luna smiled, touched the amulet on her chest, and slowly walked back, to the village, to the portal waiting to take her home. At home, in her quiet house near Ottery St. Catchpole, Luna finally managed to finish her article about auguries. Words flowed easily now, thoughts formed into logical sentences. The experience in Sweden had taught her something important, that every creature, every magical system, every forest has its own balance, its own wisdom that must be respected. When the article was finished, she began another, not for a scientific journal, but for herself. A detailed report about everything that had happened in Eldskagen, about runes, about the detector, about the guardians, about Ravenclaw and her legacy. Perhaps someday this information would prove useful. Perhaps in centuries someone else would find ancient magic and not know what to do with it. And then Luna's records would help them make the right choice. A month later came another letter from Magnus. Island had fully recovered. She remembered everything, was dreaming again of becoming a magizoologist. They were planning to come to Britain next summer, to visit Luna, to meet personally. Luna replied, inviting them. She also wrote that she knew the perfect place for Island's first research expedition. A forest in Scandinavia where trees grew filled with ancient magic, where guardians lived who remembered millennia. And another week later came one last unexpected letter, from Wolfgang Krieger. Luna looked at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Finally she dared. Fräulein Lovegood, I write to you from Germany, from my residence, surrounded by the collection of artifacts I've gathered all my life. I look at them now with different eyes. After the events in Eldskagen, I've thought much. About wisdom. About what truly matters. You were right, I missed the most important thing. Possession does not equal understanding. I've decided to transfer most of my collection to museums and research institutes. Things should be accessible for study, not locked in a private collection. I'm keeping only a few items, those that remind me of important lessons. One of them is a modest stone from Ravenclaw's cave, which I picked up before leaving. It has no magical value, but it reminds me of the day I understood that not everything is worth taking. Thank you for that lesson, Fräulein. You are wiser than I will ever be. With respect, Wolfgang Krieger. Luna slowly folded the letter, smiled. Even Krieger understood. Perhaps late, perhaps not completely, but he understood. This too was part of balance, giving people a chance to change, to learn, to grow. Spring came to Britain slowly, as always. Snow melted, revealing green grass. Trees covered themselves with buds. Birds returned from warm lands, filling the air with songs. Luna stood in her small garden, planting seeds of rare magical plants she planned to study this summer. Sun warmed her back, wind gently touched her hair. On her chest, under her cloak, the amulet from Silvermora's inhabitants lay warm against her skin, reminding her of the distant forest and friends she'd made there. Suddenly she felt a presence. She looked around. Between the trees of her garden, barely noticeable, stood a semi-transparent figure. A forest guardian. Not the one she'd spoken with in Eldskagen, but another, younger, less formed. You're far from home, Luna said quietly. The forest is everywhere, the guardian answered in a voice like the rustle of young leaves. Where there are trees, where there is balance, there are we. The elders sent me to deliver a message. What message? The new trees are growing, quickly and strongly. In a year, Eldskagen will be larger than it's ever been before. You are invited to visit then, to see the miracle you helped create. Luna smiled. I will certainly come. The guardian nodded and began to fade. One more thing, he said before disappearing. The diadem is also changing. New magic grows around it. Ravenclaw left more than they thought. Many more secrets await solving. And he vanished, leaving Luna alone with her thoughts. Many more secrets. Many more adventures ahead. Luna looked at the sky where clouds drifted unhurriedly, drawing shapes that resembled ancient runes. Looked at the ground beneath her feet, where the seeds she'd just planted were already beginning to sprout, reacting to her magic. Balance. It had always been about balance. Between knowledge and wisdom. Between power and compassion. Between taking and giving. Ravenclaw had known this 1,000 years ago. She'd left a lesson woven into runes and magic, hidden in forest and diadem. A lesson that Luna now carried in her heart. And she knew she would share this lesson. In her articles, in her research, in her life. Teaching others that true magic lies not in controlling nature, but in understanding it. Not in possessing artifacts, but in respecting the knowledge they contain. She returned to her work, planting seeds, tending sprouts. Simple, modest work that was part of life's great cycle. And she was happy, because she understood the most important thing, that wisdom lies not in knowing everything, but in understanding one's place in the world. Being part of balance, not trying to control it. This was Ravenclaw's lesson, Eldskigen's lesson, a lesson that changed Luna forever. And when she looked at her reflection in the small pond in the corner of the garden, she saw not only herself. She also saw the forest guardians behind her, the diadem glowing with quiet blue light, runes pulsing in rhythm with her heart. She saw who she'd become, a magizoologist, a researcher, a keeper of balance, and perhaps most importantly, a person who'd learned to listen. To listen to the forest, to creatures, to magic itself. To listen to what others considered impossible, strange, unreal. Because there, in the strange and impossible, often hid the deepest truth. Luna smiled at her reflection and returned to work. Life continued. Mysteries waited. Balance held. And all was well. A year later, Luna truly returned to Eldskigen. She brought with her Island and Magnus. Together they walked among the new trees, which had grown to 5 meters already, their branches interweaving, creating a living arch of blue light. There were so many guardians that the forest seemed alive in a new way, as if every tree, every branch had consciousness, its own voice in nature's great chorus. And in the forest's center, in the cave, the diadem still lay on its pedestal. Untouched, beautiful, protected, waiting for the next worthy one. The next person who would understand that true wisdom lies not in taking, but in preserving. Luna stood before it one last time, touched the amulet on her chest, and whispered, "Thank you, Rowena, for the lesson, for the trust, for everything." And it seemed to her that the diadem flared a bit brighter, as if answering, as if saying, "You're welcome." They left the cave together, Luna, Magnus, Island, emerged into daylight, where the forest waited, alive and wise, filled with ancient magic and new hope. And Luna knew she would return here many more times, because Eldskigen had become part of her, just as she'd become part of it, forever.